Sorry. Good evening. I'm Rhonda Basor, City Clerk, and I'm calling the meeting of October 14th City Council meeting to order. The Mayor, Carlin Strobel, is out of town, and Carol Smith is out of town. So this evening we'll be electing one of these council members to serve as the person that runs the meeting. So with that, I make a motion or ask for somebody to make a motion.
Madam Clerk, I make a motion that Councilman Lara act as mayor this evening.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Councilmember Lara will run the meeting.
Welcome, everybody, to our city council meeting. Today is October 14, 2014. And to start off, would you do a roll call, Rhonda?
Yes. Councilmember Lara?
Here.
Councilmember Blatz?
Here.
Councilmember Clapp?
Present.
And Councilmember Blatz, would you lead us to the Pledge of Allegiance?
After me, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So tonight, we're going to start off with presentations. To start off, we're going to recognize our outgoing Historical Preservation Commissioner, Pat Donor. Presented. There's going to be some comments by our fellow Commissioner, Terry Hill. If you may step up to the podium.
I'm going to read a little passage that I prepared. It was 1993, and the newly appointed class of Historic Preservation Commissioners, Pat Clark Dorner, Margaret Meninger, and myself, joined a veteran group of Ojai preservationists. With mentors like Betty McAllister and Zelma Wilson, we were eager and ready to designate old as historic. Pat had the edge on Margaret and me, as she was from Ojai pioneer stock and was well-versed on her historic heritage. It didn't take long before our commission learned Pat's literary skills as she became the astute grammarian and punctuation expert on our monthly minutes. After a tenure of 5 or 6 years, Pat resigned from her HPC post to devote time in writing the bestseller, The Judge, a biographical account of William Clark, President Ronald Reagan's right-hand man. After her literary hiatus, she rejoined the HPC and has been a valued member ever since. Pat is very involved in the activities of the Southern California and National Irish American organizations. While her interests are many, her passion for her Irish heritage is great. I remember my first visit to Patricia's home for some Preservation Commission work, and as I was winding my way up to her mountain top ranch, I saw a curl of smoke rising from the chimney. When I entered the living room, I expected to see peat logs burning in her fireplace, as there just had to be a peat bog somewhere on the ranch. As we worked on our HPC business, my eyes turned up and I gazed upon her beautiful upstairs balcony where her library of the lore of Ireland is housed. I'm sure she got her inspiration for her Clark Irish Library from the Mammoth Library at Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland, an institution in which she pursued graduate studies. Some of my most enjoyable moments on this commission have been working with fellow subcommittee members Patricia Clark Dorner, Craig Walker, and David Mason, trading Ojai stories. As our sessions grew longer, so did the stories. All of us on the Ojai Historic Preservation Commission will miss Pat, and we hope that on occasion she will come back and visit us with just one more story. Thank you.
Pat, would you like to make some comments or any?
I really hesitated to do this because my favorite people are on the Historic Preservation Commission for those reasons that Terry just told you. But my husband is not well right now, and that's where I need to put my efforts. And if I'm ever invited, yes, I will tell more stories. So thank you. I really enjoyed my time on the commission.
Thank you very much, Pat, for your
And
devotion.
Pat-
Thank you.
Pat, I do want to present you with a plaque from the city of Ojai for volunteering as a commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Pat. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat.
Is there anybody else from the public that would like to make a comment or tell a story? Or any fellow council members? No. Well, thank you, Pat, for your years of service. Thank you. Our second presentation tonight is a report from Ojai Basin Groundwater Management Agency, and Councilwoman Clapp will be making an introduction.
Hi, good evening, everybody. As a board member on the Ojai Basin Groundwater Management Agency, which is quite the mouthful, took me a while to even be able to say it, the OBGMA, I've learned a lot about water in the basin and in this valley and how precious our water is to us. And one of the people that has helped me learn so much about that is Jordan Kerr. And tonight, he's graciously accepted our invitation to give us a short lesson in water in the valley and how it works. And I'm also hoping that will help people to understand more about the Ojai Basin Groundwater Management Agency itself and what it is doing in the valley to work to preserve our groundwater and the water in the valley so that we can maintain our lifestyle in a manner that we would like, which is being able to grow a garden, have our farmers, and sustain our lifestyle as it is today. So, Jordan, I would love to have you come forward. And you mentioned that maybe Mr. Grant was going to be here, but I don't see him. So come on forward. Okay, great. Jordan?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Presentation to come up here. Or mind control.
The other thing I'd like to mention is that it's a complex issue, but in some way, Jordan makes it understandable, which is, I think, pretty remarkable, considering a lot of it has to do with graphs and math and all this stuff, and also something that we can't see that's under our feet every day. So it's really, I found it fascinating because he's so good at explaining this.
Just go back to the front. This way. We'll have to rewind so you get a brief preview here. So much for not seeing what we talk about. Okay. All right. Excellent. Well, thank you, Councilwoman Clapp and Councilman Lara and Latz. Appreciate the opportunity to come and say hello to you once again and give this presentation. We officially title it Evolution of the Hydrogeologic Understanding and Groundwater Management of the Ojai Basin, Ventura County, California. Now, that's a mouthful, but really it comes down to what's the OBGMA and what do they do? And how are they helping us to meet their own goals, which really embrace the goals of not just folks here in the valley and in the city, but really throughout the Ventura River watershed. And importantly, we've seen big changes in the state of California, really spurred by the drought that we're enduring. And many of the legislators who recently wrote, in fact, some of the attorneys who wrote the legislation that the governor signed with respect to groundwater are some of the same ones that were involved in generating the original enabling act for the OBGMA. So in a way, the OBGMA is somewhat of a nascent poster child, if you will, for how groundwater management is done in California, starting right here in this valley. So there's the long answer. Now, Ojai, as you know, straight out of the Visitors Bureau, shows up here. To some folks, it's an oil field. To others, it's a picturesque place. And of course, this is a view from Upper Ojai. You don't even see the city here. You don't even see the valley floor. But it's part of what makes this place special. Of course, that's a nice green, verdant springtime photo, and it'd be completely brown if you looked at it today, except for what's in the hills, which are the more native, adapted plants that allow us to enjoy that scenery year-round. To a geologist, it looks something like this. This is a geologic map that indicates different ground surface rock types. The yellows are more young alluvium, and that's what the basin is made out of. The storage of sand and gravel units that are saturated and bear water to the basin and to the wells therein. The other formations, the browns and the maroons, those are the bedrock formations that are in the hillsides and mountains surrounding us. In this little inset are the actual delineated groundwater basins locally. You have the Ojai Basin itself, number 18 there in the upper portion, Upper Ojai, the Ventura River groundwater basins, and some of those down closer to the coast in Ventura. But if we zoom into where the Ojai Basin Groundwater Management Agency jurisdiction is and where the delineated groundwater basin here in Ojai is, you have a couple different overlapping interests. You can see the city limits there on the left. The red is the outline of the groundwater basin itself, sort of abruptly ending just to the west and in the western portion of the city. Now, the OBGMA jurisdiction is the black outline here, and you can see the watershed extending far beyond that. You also see the Ojai Water Conservation District interest areas in the purple, and you see some of the mutual water companies outlined in the diagonal patterns, oppositely oriented from that where the city and Golden State Water Company's service area is. So the OBGMA, which was established really at the nadir of the last major drought that we had locally, has a mission to preserve the quantity and quality in the Ojai Basin so that the long-term water supply is protected and maintained for the common benefit of water users in the basin. That's equally growers, that's equally residential users, and equally the city. It has these management goals that are established in its enabling legislature and supported via several groundwater management plans and updates, including understanding the basin, controlling exports, encouraging supporting activities, effectively communicating what the agency is and does, part of why we're here today, and efficient administration. When we talk about the management goals, understanding the basin includes monitoring, data collection, well registration, and extraction measurement. Recently, we've been sent out a survey to many of the pumpers and well owners in the basin and asked, what do they know about their wells? How are they pumping for them? How much sand are they making? How deep is the water level in those wells? And many of those survey respondents actually requested that the OBGMA come out and measure those water levels in their wells to see exactly where those water levels were, because those are our windows to the health of the basin. Controlling exports, that's an interesting one. The number one thing is to establish thresholds and triggers for surplus. And how often is there a surplus of water in Ojai? Any guesses? It's very rare, and it only happens at times when we have excess rainfall. The last time it happened, wells were looking like fountains. They're flowing artesian, and they're flowing out from the heads of the wells to ground surface and flowing down the creeks and effectively naturally exporting via San Antonio Creek. So most of the time, when there's something to think about, it's preventing those exports. Encouraging supporting activities is a big management goal of the agency. It includes data collection and storage, water conservation efforts, inventorying and permitting abandoned wells and the destruction thereof or conversion to monitoring points. It includes artificial recharge, and we'll talk about the San Antonio Creek Spreading Grounds Rehabilitation Project, the ribbon cutting ceremony for which you may have heard about, attended, or read about in the newspapers locally. There's also the watershed management component, and that involves being interactive with many of the other stakeholders in the Ventura River watershed and associated with the Watersheds Coalition of Ventura County. And that's an agency and a subcommittee that has the capacity to pursue grants and fund major projects that benefit the integrated regional watershed management. Just another mouthful. Effective communication, we're trying to do that every day. There's an advisory committee that's appointed for effective communication. The OBGMA issues an annual report, and we try to share information via the website, mailers, and the like. In fact, we'll be at Ojai Day on Saturday to go through these same type of things and answer questions one-on-one to folks who are interested. And of course, efficient administration. This includes funding, largely via either grants or the actual pump tax, if you will, the relatively nominal fee that the GMA charges for the management of the basin on an acre-foot basis. There are monthly meetings, which are public. The board is very active in those meetings and comprised of members of a representative from the city. Councilwoman Clapp has been serving on that capacity for many years. We have a representative from Golden State Water Company, a representative from Casitas, a representative from Ojai Water Conservation District, and a representative from the mutual water companies. And it meets the minimum requirements as stated in the enabling legislature of the agency. So let's get down to tax and understanding the basin. This is the agency area again, but in 1933, this is what folks thought of the Ojai Basin, the Ojai Valley Groundwater Basin. This is the State of California Department of Public Works publication from 1933. And I love this because this is a cross-section through the earth, as if you were to take a slice right north-south, looking to the east, straight through the Ojai Valley. And what do you see? Well, you see a lot of bedrock formations. That's the green. The elevation from below sea level by about 500 feet up to over 4,000 feet at Nordhoff Peak on the left side, on the north side of this cross-section, down to the valley floor, and then to the south through Lion Canyon, Sulphur Mountain, and Hammond Canyon further to the south. And what strikes me about this is that there's relatively a lot of detail of the bedrock and very little detail about the groundwater basin. It just looks like that little sliver, that little orange sliver of, they call it QT, a quaternary terrace deposit. Basically just a little pond where, yeah, there might be a little bit of water there. By 1953, they realized there was quite a bit of water there and decided, hey, look, not only do we have a little bit of information on the bedrock formations, we also have some detail about what we call recent and Pleistocene deposits. And they put about 8 wells on this cross-section, each of which went either partially through or all the way through the basin, all the way to the bedrock, to establish where that contact was and give us more of a shape per the 1953 level of understanding of the Ojai Basin. Come 1992, this is a report that was conducted on behalf of the agency by Stahl, Gardner, and Dunn. And you can see that there's a bit more detail. In each of these steps of decades of understanding, they're paying less and less attention to that bedrock formations outside of the basin and more to the sand and gravel units, which are the primary units which bear water to the basin. And then come along 2005, we get pretty detailed. In fact, in this case, we're showing a cross-section based largely on geophysical logs. This is just one of about several that we put together for this type of study. And in this one, you see 5 geophysical logs that overlap and give us a really good understanding of the detail of how many sand and gravel units are present within this basin. and it gets better. Those are where those cross sections were. The one that I just showed is the B to C prime, so it's going near where we're standing today. We also did a handful of aquifer tests there, 6 to be exact, and then evaluated the data from 2 previous testing, one associated with one of Golden State Water Company's well construction project, and another associated with Soul Park from back in the 60s, when once upon a time folks in town were concerned about export of water from the basin, thinking that Ventura County Retired Employees Association, which ran Soul Park at the time, as you may know, actually our historians would know all about that, but we would understand that when a new well is pumped, it's going to have effect on other wells. And what's the effect of that? And should Soul Park be limited to how much water they can take? And to this day, that is the only adjudication of quantification of the amount of water that is allowed to be taken out. And the stipulation is only for use in Ojai, only for use on the park, not to be exported. The concern was, are they going to take that water and ship it down south? Not going to happen. Folks put their foot down then, the GMA does it today. We get even more detailed in our understanding of the basin. In this case, it's what we called the groundwater model. It was funded via a local groundwater assistance grant funded by the Department of Water Resources a few years back, where we actually discretized the basin into 11 separate layers, each with different hydraulic conductivities, a big word to mean kind of like a speed limit of how fast water can flow through a sand and gravel unit or how slow it moves through a clay unit. All of that, we were able to say, what happens to water when it flows into the basin? What happens to water when it gets to the basin? How is it recharged? How do we understand the basin? So a little tour here is basically on May 15th, 2006, a relatively average year. We had a little bit of flow in San Antonio Creek. And if you're familiar with this is up near Gridley Road, Ladera Road rather, and it's where that star is on the lower inset map, crossing that dry crossing. So you see a good amount of flow in San Antonio Creek. As we move a little bit further down, this is near an old diversion works on the creek, rather picturesque flow of water. I mean, the further you get from that and the drier it gets, the more that looks like it would quench my thirst. And it's kind of inspiring that we know that will come again. The question is when and how do we manage the lean times? As we move further down the creek, you see the flow dissipates a little bit. What's happening to it? It's infiltrating into the basin. It's recharging those aquifers that eventually will flow down and reach some of the wells that either supply private or the water purveyors' wells, and maybe even come through your taps. In fact, some of that water you're looking at today almost assuredly made it through some of the taps here in Ojai. But by the time we get down to Grand Avenue Bridge, that water's fully infiltrated. It's gone from surface flow. It's found its way into the subsurface aquifers and truly is recharging the basin. But then it picks up again. When we start getting south of Grand Avenue Bridge, you see surface flows start to come back, and they start slow as ponds as it seeps up into the creek. And by the time we get down a little bit further south, just before Ojai Avenue, that flow starts to pick up a bit more. You can see a little bit of flow there. And by the time we're getting out near the exit point of the basin, down on San Antonio Creek, south of the bridge, near Soul Park, that flow is really picking up. And by the time it exits the basin, it's almost a full-flown creek once again. And this is a time when the basin is being recharged, it's accepting a lot of water. And by the way, in 2006, even though it was an average water year, we still had wells that flowed artesian, indicating the basin had reached its capacity. Much of that was due to the preceding year, and you may remember 2005 being very wet, when there was still so much water left over from that basin, from that rainy year, that 2006 just took an average year to return to those surplus conditions and those flowing artesian wells, and that's the way water gets exported from the basin. So we take all these years and we can come up with a way to predict how much recharge would we get in a given year based on the amount of precipitation on the valley floor. What's the average rainfall on the valley floor here, it's actually about 21.25 inches. That's quite a bit, but it's a lot less than what occurs on the headwaters, on the ridges at Nordhoff, Chief Peak. Those areas have so much more precipitation owing to orography, or this water is squeezed out of clouds as it reaches up into the mountains, cooler temperatures and higher elevations. We see a lot more precipitation happen up there, around 36 to 40 inches of rain on average every year. This year, not so much. We'll get into that. Artificial recharge projects. I mentioned the San Antonio Creek Spreading Grounds Rehabilitation Project. This takes a series of old spreading grounds and rehabilitates them, allows not just the surface water to pond and percolate, but also be clarified such that it can be injected passively directly into the aquifers that need it most. Just takes a little bit of rain. Actually, I read that on the cover of the newspaper, a couple weeks back. Just waiting on rain, aren't we all? So what are the benefits of this? This project, it's significant numbers of acre feet put into the basin that would otherwise escape during periods of high flow. We also have a greater understanding of the basin through some of the depth discrete monitoring wells that we have and the like. To model that, what happens if you have spreading of the water from those basins, from those spreading grounds, you see a distinct increase in water levels in the basin as that water is spread, which means lower pumping cost, which means better quality water. We also have other types of artificial recharge. This is the treatment plant near Thatcher School on the east end. It's not what we typically think of as artificial recharge, but it is what I call anthropogenic recharge, or man-made recharge, that comes through naturally out the tail end of people and into their septic systems. But it is a component of recharge to the basin. We understand a bit better about the quality of water. Nitrates in this example, these little paw prints are each nitrate molecules. You can see on the east end we have some pretty high concentrations of nitrate, 47 there at one of the wells that's monitored. By the time we get into the city and the city's wells, it's negligible, which is a good thing, and that it allows to attenuate before the Golden State wells extract that water. Chloride's a little bit different story. That's this one, Cl minus. Chloride's the component of table salt that is not sodium, right? And what do we know about that? Well, it's kind of the opposite story. On the east end, we have some pretty low concentrations. There's some of the things down at the sea level, 21 parts per million, 58 toward the center of the basin, but 620 from some of the wells at depth in the center of the basin. So why is that? That's something that's really puzzled a lot of folks for a while, but fortunately we've had some pretty good studies done and have a pretty good understanding about why that's there. We'll get into that in a second. We call it stratified water quality. And when Golden State Water Company drilled their well in March 2005, I think it was San Antonio number 4, they did a series of depth discrete tests. In an open borehole, what they did was they sampled water at depth and tested the quality of water. They moved up the borehole and tested the quality again. And what you're seeing here are called stiff water quality diagrams. Basically, the wider these are, the poorer the quality of the water is. And what that means is that those deeper zones have saltier water to them. So what happens when water levels are lower and we're in these periods of drought? Anybody notice in your taps? A little bit poorer quality water today than 5 years ago, 9 years ago. Some of those wetter times, you have fresher water available. The wells are producing more, but they're also producing a better quality of water. And understanding why that is and being able to understand how that's recharged is important from the standpoint of the OBGMA. Now, these are some pretty complicated diagrams. There's a lot of science into it, but I like to do this. Think about it this way. Groundwater flow rates, when that recharge is going through the creek, it's getting into those shallow aquifers first. It's doing like a jackrabbit. In fact, it's moving along pretty quick, and that's kind of fun. But those deeper zones that have poor quality water in them, guess what? Of course, they're the tortoise. And they cruise along slowly, and they stop, and they stay there. So the deeper that you have those pumping water levels, the poorer the quality of water is yielded by all of the wells in that pumping depression area. This is part of understanding the basin that the OBGMA has been charged with. And this kind of example we've given to a handful of presentations, but it certainly it certainly sticks with you if you think about it as a tortoise and the hare. Why is it? Well, this is a picture of Death Valley, and you see that salt ring around that alluvial fan. Guess what we have in Ojai, off of the mountains to the north? Alluvial fans, shaped just like this. What happens when the lake deposits dry up? They leave behind salt, evaporite deposits. Could that happen here? Yeah, I think so. An area of uplift to the west, area of landslides to the south that would potentially dam off San Antonio Creek or whatever ancestral stream was there. You have faults on the north side, faults on the south side, and this, what I would call ancient Lake Ojai, to borrow from the Chumash. I like that name. You always have to, if you're going to name a lake, that's where it would be, and you want to give it as old of a name as you can think of. So let's move on. What are we doing these days? Talk about subsidence, basin conditions, new wells. Why? Are they good? Are they bad? What's the outlook for water supply here in the coming years? If we zoom over back to this graphic here, you can see once again where those wells are, but I like to do this. When the water comes into the basin, to summarize, it comes in through the creeks, largely based on understanding of the models and how things have responded and how the soils infiltrate. We see most of the recharge occurring along stream channels. It's important to keep those clean as possible, keep them clear, keep them protected. The water flows through the basin subsurficially and then discharges out naturally via near Sol Park along San Antonio Creek. Here's this graphic once again. Average precipitation is that vertical line in the middle at about 21¼ inches. An average recharge, around 52 to 5,300 acre feet, which is relatively in balance with the extraction measurements that the OBGMA has had its finger on the pulse of for the past 13, 14 years. What happened in 2010 to 2011? 29.27 inches of rain on the valley floor. That was a pretty good year. In fact, most of our rain came in about 7 days. Remember that? Remember how wet it was in December? And just dry in January. But it did wonders for the basin. We had over 10,000 acre feet of recharge to the Ojai Basin. 2011-12, not so rosy. 11.35 inches of rain here on the valley floor, around 2,000 acre feet of recharge. 2012 to 2013, it was even more grim, with 9.06 inches of rain, and around just under 2,000 acre feet. How dry was it in 2013 to 14? Emergency, 911. And about the same amount of recharge. But what's interesting is as we get into those drier years, we're still seeing some recharge. And a lot of that is due to those plants that we were seeing up high in the watersheds. This time of year, the days are getting shorter, nights are getting longer, they're getting cooler. Those plants are taking up less spring water. And a lot of that spring water is finding its way into the creeks, and you might not see them flow at the surface, but they are flowing underground and reaching the depths of the basin. So even though we haven't had a lot of precipitation, we've started to see water levels recover in the basin through the monitoring programs that the OBGMA is undertaking. Here's one of those. This is the Key Well. This is near Karn and Grand, and it's been around since the 1940s. And you'll notice sort of end members of this spectrum. When was the absolute driest it ever was in the basin? Not to call too much emergency, but it was September 11th, 1951. And at that time in this well, the depth to water was about 310 feet below ground surface. That's pretty darn deep. How deep is it today? We're 100 feet higher than that still. But what happened in 1952? One of the wettest years on record. You see that spike that happened right after that? Right after that, the driest time, we came up to above what an average depth to water would be. The Ojai Basin has always been known to discharge relatively quickly, but also recharge very quickly. And in that way, it's somewhat self-regulating in that we see a good amount of extraction, but we also see a good amount of recharge, even in dry years. Now, the OBGMA has a handful of loggers that are monitoring water levels on very rapid bases. Some are monitoring water levels on hourly rates, some every 3 to 6 hours. Here's where some of those wells are. We have one at the San Antonio Creek Spreading Grounds Rehabilitation in the Depositional Creek Monitoring Well. We have Topa Topa Well number 5 way on the east end. We have one at the Elrod Well, not too far from that key well that's been around since the 40s. We have one at the Lago Marcino Ranch up Gridley. We have one down at Jerry Conroe's Ranch near Reeves Road. We have one in the middle of town at Brandon Hansen's home at the well that can be seen there near Park and Grant. This is what one of those wells look like and the data that we collect from them. Via automated loggers, we get a very detailed understanding of how water levels are changing when wells are pumped and when wells are not. And what we've seen over the course of monitoring this is that there's not a lot of change happening right now. Over the long term, we see those fluctuations, but when we're in this portion of the season and these portion of the water cycles, it tends to be relatively consistent, telling us that the basin is in pretty good shape. Subsidence is something you see on the news a lot. In fact, we're probably skewed by seeing a lot of alarmist news about the drought, about groundwater in California. And a lot of that, you think about what a percentage of the 10 square mile area that Ojai Basin is compared to the state of California, it's relatively small. So it's easy to see the national or the statewide news flashes and think, is that happening here? And that's something that we think about. Subsidence is one of those things. What is subsidence? Well, it's when you're driving through Arizona and you see these signs. Subsidence area. It's when the water levels decline so much that the basins actually compact and the ground surface goes down. What happens? Water levels down below are extracted at a rate so great that they're no longer pushing up on clay or silt confining layers, and those actually compact. If we look at that in a more scientific way, think about squeezing a sponge. When the sponge is wet, what is it? It's thick. When it dries out, it shrinks a little bit. The same thing happens in these fine-grained layers. Now, how many of those fine-grained layers do we have in Ojai? In the basin, not that many. In fact, much of the aquifer skeletons are supported by the big boulders and cobbles and gravels that you see in the creek beds today. Some detailed scientific monitoring has been done, and we see, oh, look, some of those greens are right in the center of town here. Does that mean that we've had a decrease in elevation of ground surface or relative to something else? It tends to be relatively near the center of the spectrum, between less than 2 millimeters in a given year of expansion or contraction and less than 2 millimeters per year of expansion. How does that compare to what's happening in the Central Valley? If you look closely at these graphs, you're seeing 10 millimeters of drop in 1 year. That means that they're an order of magnitude greater where subsidence is actually an issue as compared to here in Ojai. So when I say, but in Ojai, is subsidence happening? A gravel matrix supported aquifer system that's not fine-grained, it's limited extent compared to large basins, and the recharge to aquifers occurs over the long-term period of record as opposed to long-term declines like we see in basins where subsidence is an issue. Now, we also had that 1951 low that we talked about. If there were subsidence in the basin, it would have been reached in 1951, and as long as you don't reach that level, then it's not going to compact further beyond that, which would be recharged and rebounded. Anybody see any of those big cracks around town or on the east end? I haven't. Anybody see any other big evidence of subsidence? I haven't. The crushed can well casings, you don't see those here. What do they look like? They look like this. This old fella, poor guy, his well, victim of subsidence. That well pad elevated, which was originally flush with land surface. Land surface declines by about 2 feet. He's got problems. I don't see that around a lot of the wells we look at here in Ojai. Don't see it. This crack, Picacho, Arizona, I don't see it in Ojai. If you see them, let me know. New wells, always a point of discussion, both in this forum and others. When we think about new wells, I often think of decentralization. In the center of the Ojai Basin is a long-standing pumping depression. It's an area where water levels have been very low for a long period of time. There's a significant amount of extraction that occurs from there and is deposited via taps and on lawns and in gardens throughout the city. Now, if someone decides to drill a water well outside of that pumping depression area, it reduces the demand or decentralizes the demand on that pumping depression, which then does a couple things. One, not as much water has to be extracted from that pumping depression. What does that do? Pumping water levels are not as deep. What we were just talking about, deep pumping water levels and water quality. If the pumping water levels are deep, is the quality good or bad? Bad. Good. If the pumping water levels are shallow, the water quality is? Thank you. All right. So by decentralization, by taking that demand on the basin and distributing it out to outlying areas, not only where it's used, but where it's not placing that much of a demand on the center, it actually can help us all out. So what's the outlook? One of my favorite things about a Monday is that NOAA puts out their, this time of year, this year, El Nino predictions. Where are they today? Anybody heard? 60 to 65% during the northern hemisphere fall and early winter. When are we starting to expect to see the results of this? In about 1 to 2 months. That means a wet December. And in fact, November, December, January is the peak bar graph there in red of the maximum predicted El Nino effect. Now, anybody remember the summer of 1994? How about 2004? You know what they remind me a lot of? 49. Well, I'm not the historian here. But I remember a lot of south swells those years. And my grandpa probably remembers quite a few of the south swells. In fact, they had a great time. You know, they would take a Packard and pull a Volkswagen bus that didn't have an engine in it, put a goat and the surfboards in the Volkswagen bus and drive it down to the beach. That was 49 for them. But they had a lot of south swells coming in, and we had a lot of the Chubasco type hurricane skies that you see. It's a beautiful thing, and it reminds me of those years that happened 10 years ago and that happened 20 years ago. It seems to be happening a bit this year too. So it bodes well, just from a casual surfer's observer standpoint, that we might just have a decent year. And if we get an average amount of rain, if we get above average amount of rain, it really does wonders for us all. What's the official prediction? See that big green A? Above average. Where it's blank, it's equal chance of precipitation. We're right on the cusp of about 30% chance of above average precipitation per NOAA on their weekly outlook for El Nino surface oscillation. I like that, because when that happens, this happens. And until then, we just got to keep praying for rain. So with that, I thank you, and I'm happy to take whatever questions we can. Like I said, we'll be attending and having a booth at Ojai Day on Saturday, and you can always give me a call if you wish, and have any discussions. The OBGMA is here to serve, and we're happy to be a part of it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jordan, for that thorough presentation. I do want to ask my fellow council members if they have any questions for Jordan.
Yes, I do. Jordan, could I ask you a couple of questions? One is, are there several wells within the basin that do not have meters on them?
There may be a few, but it is a OBGMA ordinance that those wells are metered. And if they are not metered, they cannot report and do not have, they're not in compliance with that ordinance, which can yield a non-compliant abandoned status, and therefore the owners of that well and the property can receive a lien from the county and not be allowed for future permitting on that property and limit its value to the owners.
Okay. So is there any enforcement on causing them to have to put a meter on the well?
It limits their capacity to develop. That is the
That's it?
enforcement.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that when we have a application for a new well to come before us, it's gone to the agency and with some sort of an approval given to it. What is the approval that you're really giving to that new well before it comes to us?
So when a permittee applies for a well permit in the city of Ojai, there are 3 levels of permitting. One is to the OBGMA. The OBGMA receives the permit application. It is reviewed by the secretary, who makes a note of the well's location, makes a note of who would be drilling that well, who the owner would be, and it immediately goes into their files. That way they have an understanding, the OBGMA has an understanding of to whom they should be submitting annual extraction report statements and understanding what new wells are occurring in the basin. Most of them are relatively small. The secretary signs that, and it can then come to the city of Ojai for your council's approval. Following that, the county permit is the actual permit that allows a well to be constructed by the water supply well driller.
Okay.
So there is a level of review that happens at the OBGMA that is largely for location. And is there anything alarming about the case that may be detrimental to the quality or quantity of water in the basin?
Okay. So when we get an approval from the agency with an applicant, that means that you have looked at the cumulative effect that well may have on the basin. You've looked at where it's going to be in the basin and determined that there's no adverse effects to the basin if this particular well is drilled.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
May I speak? I have a question. I have a real quick
Councilmember
question for
Lapp.
Jordan. Could you explain real quickly about the right to drill for water in California, and particularly as in compared to other states?
Interesting. Well, that's a very much of a moving target, and largely having to do with the legislation recently enacted at the state level. For the groundwater legislation, which may be putting more emphasis on less of a Wild West mentality that's happening in largely the Central Valley of California, wherein the agencies were issuing permits in basins that did not have the same health as Ojai does. So ultimately, when a well is constructed, it has to be permitted through a county agency. Here we have 3 levels of permitting support. So what I'd like you to do is maybe refine your question a bit more for me.
Okay, help me with that.
Just repeat it. Start there.
I think it's a very, in my lay terms, it's very simplistic. Basically, everyone has a right to drill a water well. Isn't that true? Unless if an area is what's called adjudicated,
Yes.
correct?
So
we cannot say no if somebody wants to drill a well, is that right?
It is not adjudicated in the Ojai.
Yeah,
basin.
it's not adjudicated here, so we cannot say no,
So a property
correct?
owner has in an unadjudicated basin, has an overlying right to drill for groundwater underlying that property and extract an unlimited and unquantified amount of water for the reasonable and beneficial use on that property. It's not export, it's not selling the water to the neighbor, unless they have a different type of right, like an appropriative right, such as a water purveyor may have or a city may have.
Are there any other states that have that same right, or is California the only one?
California is relatively unique in that overlying right. Some states have statewide adjudication, where a water well permit applicant would go to the state engineer or state water commission and say, we'd like to drill a well. Can we drill a well? How much can we take? And it's quantified. Sort of statewide adjudication.
Could you explain what adjudication is and what causes it to happen?
Basically, adjudication is when, in a groundwater sense, is when a court has given a judgment that quantifies the amount of water that given parties can take out of a basin. It's the result of often decades of litigation and very much expense and scientific evaluation.
Scientific evaluation being there is or isn't enough water.
Yeah, how much water is there? What is the safe yield of a given basin? What is the amount of water that can be safely extracted? What is the historic precedent that was set by these appropriative right holders? It's a very complex.
It is very complex.
In fact, one of the foremost water attorneys in California described California water law a few years back as trying to find where's Waldo on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. But Michelangelo didn't paint Waldo on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. So it's really something that's been feeling its way for many, many years via adjudications, via lawsuits, much like we had in Barrett et al. V. Soul Park in the 19th.
Which is the only adjudicated
Only adjudication.
thing within this valley,
And it means they can drill as many wells as they want at Soul Park.
but they can't sell it.
They can't export the water, and they can only take a certain quantified amount out of the basin for use on the park.
So to me, what's really important with this is to understand that there's an inherent water right to drill for water unless an area is adjudicated. I mean, to be very basic and simple, correct?
You have that overlying right as a
Right,
property owner.
Right. So it comes to the city and the county, et cetera, for approval because it's more about overseeing how the well is drilled, that it's drilled in a proper manner, not so much that they're, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
The permit largely is a ministerial permit at the county level that says this well will be drilled by a licensed and reputable contractor. It will be sealed properly to protect the groundwater quality above and below in accordance with water well standards. And it will be here locally recorded and reported to the OBGMA such that there's a good quantification of how much water is being extracted by each well.
Which comes to the well monitoring that the OBGMA does.
Absolutely.
So all the wells in the valley are to be monitored.
Correct.
And recorded.
Monitored.
So that
and
we have an idea of how much water is coming out of the basin.
Yeah. And in fact, in the last month's meeting, the OBGMA voted to go from a biannual extraction period to quarterly.
Quarterly.
Such that there is now even more definition in the amount of water that's extracted over the course of a water year.
And all of this is to make sure that we're not going beyond what's called safe yield. And if we go beyond safe yield of the basin, that's when we face potential adjudication?
Adjudication would be brought on by a lawsuit,
Okay.
and that is where most adjudications begin. Oftentimes for a judge to say that, and I'm not an attorney,
Yeah, I gotcha.
but I've been involved in a handful of these kind of suits. For a judge to say that A, is a basin going to be adjudicated, it should be declared to be in overdraft. That is, the safe yield has been exceeded for years, causing irreparable and irreversible harm to the basin's quantity or quality of water.
Which is why the OBGMA is so important in this valley, because it's overseeing our water to make sure we don't reach that position where we end up not having control of our own water, right?
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Jordy, and I do have a couple of questions also, and following up on Councilwoman Clapp questions about knowing the safe yield of this water basin. What criteria do you look at to know when we should stop drilling wells, or what do you look for?
Well, we pay attention to the general health of the basin, what's expected in coming years, much like what we've discussed tonight. What is the source of water to those currently pre-drilling to those applicants' properties? Are they collecting water from Golden State? Are they collecting water from Casitas? The Ventura River watershed, as you know, is unique in that there's no imported water here. And Ojai has Casitas that comes into the sub-watershed, but it's still part of the Ventura River watershed. So whatever water is being extracted from underground has to find its way to that property from somewhere else until it comes from underground on that individual property. It puts the onus of groundwater extraction, of water management on an individual when they drill their own well.
So you're basically saying, and sorry, there's a couple of comments out in the crowd, if you could please lower your voice. You're basically saying that you look at other wells in the area to see if there's enough water on the basin so that the individual could extract the water from there, right?
And we don't say, go ahead and extract a quantity, we don't quantify that.
But-
But we do have an understanding of where areas are that might be of concern. And we look at, are people going to extract from the alluvial aquifers of the basin or the bedrock aquifers within the jurisdiction, but outside of the basin, and that sort of thing. And that's why the OBGMA permitting process is so important, because it allows the agency to take a look at where these wells are being drilled, approximate depths, and the uses of that water, and a quantification of how much water the applicant is planning to extract.
Okay. Well, I do realize this is a presentation, and I know that there's probably so many more questions from us and from the public, but we do need to move on. I guess if there's, do we have any questions from the public? I guess it'll add a limited amount, if it's okay with the fellow council members.
We'll be at Ojai Day on Saturday. The OBGMA has a public meeting with a section for public comment and question. It'll be the 30th of this month at Pope Plaza.
Okay, great. So they'll be available for more questions. For right now, I just saw two hands, so if I could allow those two members of the public to come up and ask their questions and probably stay close, Jordan, they're probably directed toward you. So if I could please call up Bill Miley.
Hi, Bill Miley, North Signal Street. I've gone through a number of the basin agencies over the years, and I understand what they do. My friend Terry Moore and I, a couple of months ago, presented a letter of question to the board, and we had become familiar with the Fox Canyon Aquifer Management Agency in Ventura, and they have an extraction ordinance, which during times of drought, they can place controls over the amount of water that the various wells bring out of the ground. And so we asked the basin agency if they had an ordinance like that, and they don't. But my understanding is that they're starting to work on that. And maybe Jordan can say something, because that's a big step, which would begin to give us some way of managing it during really severe dry years.
If Jordan, you just want to make a comment on that?
Certainly. The Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency has served somewhat as a model for the enabling legislature of the OBGMA. So we look to the Fox Canyon as somewhat of a big brother in the groundwater management world. It takes a great deal of understanding of the basin to really come to those limits, to be able to set extraction limits, and to be able to tell people, effectively quantifying without adjudication, how much water they should be extracting for a given amount of property. It is the trust that it is a reasonable and beneficial use that is quantified by each individual extractor. And it takes a great deal of science, which we now have a basin model, and we're getting a handle on understanding the basin, to where if we were to get to that point, to enact the portions of the enabling legislature that would allow for the quantifications of extraction, that we could get there. But as Mr. Miley said, it's a long process, and the agency is exploring that as an option.
Thank you. And then our last question, William Wyrick.
Wyrick, 607 North Blanche. I'll be quick. First question, my understanding of the enabling legislation, and I'm getting different opinions on this, so I appreciate your being here and hear what you have to say, is that to know as we move Golden State Water out of this valley, we will need to go back to the legislature to get them off the board. That's my understanding. I'd like, if that's, correct me if I'm wrong. Second question, as I read Ordinance 8, it seems like civil fines are an option for lack of compliance on registration, metering, and reporting. I didn't hear that as an option. I was wondering if, in fact, I'm incorrect in my read of Ordinance 8 that civil fines, in fact, are an option for enforcement. And third, as we move into our sustainability plan for the valley, I understand that OBGMA is the default agency for the sustainability plan for the basin of their agency boundaries, which of course is much less than the valley as a whole. And whether or not, what you're thinking is, Jordan, relative to whether the sustainability plan for the new, in the new legislation, which is trying to integrate, as I understand it, surface and groundwater flows, should be for the valley as a whole, and how we deal with the fact that there is no one agency for the valley as a whole in terms of that integration.
So let's start with the sustainability plan. The agency is reviewing the groundwater legislation to see exactly how that will fit in. So that is on the table. With respect to the earlier questions, maybe if you can come up and repeat those one at a time, just so that we can join in the discussion.
Real quick, I read Ordinance 8, and it seemed like there were some provisions for OBGMA assessing civil fines.
Yes.
For lack of compliance with registration, accuracy of metering, and of the 6-month reports.
Yeah.
You indicated that wasn't an option, that only liens were an option.
Well,
is that a policy decision, or are there some legal issues that civil fines aren't an option for enforcement?
I believe the ordinance has the teeth in it. Whether or not the jaws will ever flex, that's a different story.
Okay. And then the other question was, my understanding is that in order to get Golden State off the board as we kick them out of this valley, that we'll have to go back to this legislature to get them off the board. Is that true or not true?
The OBGMA enabling legislature calls for the 5 seats that I described earlier.
Right.
A representative from Golden State, representative from the city, representative from Casitas,
Okay.
representative from Water Conservation District with the growers,
Right.
and a representative from mutual water companies.
So-
Now, because if Golden State is no longer a player within the OBGMA and
Right.
they would not have a seat there, does that seat go to another agency?
Right.
Or are there 4 seats until that time comes to pass?
Right.
So the short answer to your question is yes,
Okay.
the enabling legislature would need to be amended
Okay.
to allow for redistribution of representation.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Jordan. I appreciate everybody being patient on this subject. It's an important matter, not just for the state, but also for Ojai, and there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of good studies and research done.
Yeah, that was very helpful, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jordan. And thank you to the OBGMA also, board members. I'm going to move on to Commissioner's report. It's, if anybody, chair of a commission like to do a report? No?
There's Randy back.
Randy, if you may.
Councilmember Laura, if I could, before the commissioners come up to give the reports, if I could just give a quick announcement for the folks in the audience. Just want to let folks know on the one item on the fee schedule, which is discussion item number 3, we're going to be asking the city council to continue that item to the October 28th meeting. There's still some issues that we need to work out on the staff level on that.
And while we're talking about the agenda, I am going to pull item number 6 and put it before item number 2, just because it has to do with the art commission, so I see there's a couple of
And
pointings.
Councilman Lara?
Yes.
Because this was an agendized item, item number 3, correct? Is that right? The one you're pulling?
Yes, we're asking to.
Item number 3?
We're asking to continue the item on the resolution adopting the fee schedule
Right.
to the October 28th meeting.
Because this was an agendized item for discussion, if there is somebody here this evening to speak on that item, I think it would be respectful to at least allow them to come forward and speak, but not have the entire item discussed. Is that
Certainly.
something we can do?
Absolutely, right. We just want to give the heads up to the folks in the audience that we are planning to continue
Right,
that
okay.
item, but certainly the option of the council to invite them to give comments at
Yeah, I
this
think it's a
meeting
good
and
idea.
also at subsequent meetings.
I agree.
Right, I think it's a good thing when somebody's taking the time out of their evening to do that, that they at least have the chance to speak.
Definitely.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Now, continuing on with our commission reports, Mr. Haney.
Is it just me? Good evening. Council members and acting city manager Steve. That title fits you very nicely.
I didn't introduce myself.
I'm here representing the Parks and Recreation Commission. I just wanted to say three quick things. I wanted to thank the city council for releasing the $10,000 for the repair of the skate park. I think that was money well spent. And they did some additional work that really enhanced the ability for all the skaters to enjoy that facility. The second one is, again, talking specifically to Steve, is just, again, thank you for working with the BMX members and trying to find a location for the BMX track here in the valley. I think that's important. And they have a committee going right now, so that's, I see good things happening that way. And then the last thing I want to bring up is, obviously, Ojai Day is this Saturday. Hope we're all going to be there. I'd like to say a special thanks to Steve, but more importantly, probably to Amber Young, who took this program over 2 years ago and has just taken it from something that was ready to fall apart and fall to pieces and has really made it exceptional. So my hat's off to Amber Young, and we'll see you all out there. Thank you.
All right, if there's Christine Goldman. Chair Golden.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Lara and council people. Okay. From water to art. Well, I'd like to bring your attention to the new and very special exhibit, two pieces of which you can see behind you here. One is a piece called Self-Portrait by Linda Taylor. That's the piece over here above the bookshelves. And the other one is I Dream of Toady Upside Down by Elise Bogofsky-Harris, and that's the one on the easel on this side. And these pieces are representative works of, the mics are so loud tonight, they're like blowing my ears out. I'm going to stand back. These two pieces are representative of the works by two of the mentors from the Artist-Student Mentor Program. We're going to have a reception for that program Thursday starting at 5 o'clock. And if you have not had a chance, and this of course is for the public as well, please take a walk and look at the hallway, the Invitational Gallery hallway, where you will see the work of the students that worked with Linda Taylor and Elise, as well as students who worked on costuming. There's some costumes that have been designed and are hanging up. There's a jacket which is made out of pieces of quilted material and handmade buttons that was worked on by one of the students and their mentors. It's really pretty phenomenal. In addition to that, we will have the student who worked with Jimmy Caleri here, and they did a project collaborating on music. So we will have food and wine and entertainment from our artist-student mentors. That's this coming Thursday, starting at 5 o'clock. This is open to the public, and we hope we have a really big turnout. So enjoy your new exhibition, and I will come up later and introduce to you the two candidates that are being recommended for your approval tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, this is where we're going to public communication. Public communication is a time set aside during the meeting for members of the public to address the city council / successor agency board on items of city business other than scheduled agenda items. Matters raised at this time may be briefly discussed by the council / board and will generally be referred to staff and or placed on the subsequent agenda. Under state law, other than emergency items, no action can be taken. Persons wishing to address a council / board are requested to fill out a speaker's card prior to the council board reaching this point on the agenda. Comments must be limited to 3 minutes or less. Do I have any public comments? Or, cards here.
And Mo had to leave.
Mo. So, Christine, this for the commissioner's report. Dennis Larry.
Good evening. I'd like to thank you, first of all, for arranging to have that water presentation tonight. It was just very, very, very valuable, and I hope that someone, either you or the newspaper, will be sure and call to the public attention when that meeting is the next meeting that he's going to appear at, because I have a friend that wanted to come tonight, but his car was in the shop, and he'd be very, very interested in that subject, as well as so many in the public, I think. Tonight, I want to talk about water. It was in my mind. It's been in my mind a lot. And I have been at this council meeting twice before with this idea, and this is the third time, so it's either get a hit or probably strike out. I haven't been active at the local level lately, but I've been concentrating on the global and national situation. It really interests me. And things do not look good, in my opinion, from what I read. And I don't read the mainstream press, which means it's going to impact Ojai if this thing comes down. And I think it will. People are saying it's going to come. It's just a matter of when. We need to be independent and show our small town character now, especially with this water thing. And I want to thank you again for demonstrating small town character and so many other issues. We as a community are really, really can be proud. Okay, here's the idea. And in view of what he said, I still think it has validity. We hope that flow is going to be successful. We're going to get everything we want. And we hope that we're going to get this 30% more chance of rain. But even so, I think my idea still has validity, and that is the city should have its own well for drinking and cooking. This is a safety issue. This is an emergency issue if things go down the drain. We've got to be able to drink water and cook. Other things we'll manage somehow. Now, what my idea was that is the city to drill its own well. It would be a hand-pumped well. You can have there's all kinds of options with this thing. And it should be outside that central basin if you can do it and still be in the city. So you get the better type of water. I don't have much time here, but I'll refer you to a website called Simple Pumps. Simple Pumps. If you look that up, it's a very beautiful website. The pump and the pipes and everything would only cost you about $1,300. But you have to drill the well and the casing unless you use an existing one. But this is anyway, I see I have 0 time here. And now I'm going negative. Okay. Ding, 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 ding. Da, 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 da. Anyway, great to be back. Thanks. Keep up the good work and go Ojai.
Thank you, Dennis. And also, so you know, I think the meetings for OBGMA are the last Thursday at 3:30 or at 5 at the Wild Academy.
Put it on paper somewhere. I'll never remember it.
Okay. Deborah? Oh, Deborah Moe left. Okay. Steve Quillisi?
Thank you very much. Steve Quillisi, West Eucalyptus Street. I just had 3 quick questions. Yesterday, I happened to be talking to Nan, the lady who is government liaison for E.J. Harrison. Nan Dance. Is that right?
Drake.
Nan Drake. It brings back Mandrake the Magician, right. Anyway, we were talking about a different subject and came upon her telling me that E.J. Harrison is currently negotiating a new contract for the franchise for trash pickup here in the city. And I said, oh, I hadn't heard about any competition for that franchise, and she said, no, there wasn't any. This is sole source. And I'm confused by that. I'm sure there are other potential sources of trash pickup service available, and I'm just curious why, if it's true there was no competition, why that was. Item 2, at our candidate forums, we're seeing more and more discussion of the bowling alley. Is there a piece of the municipal code, a provision somewhere that relates to eyesores or whatever the legal term is, and a way for the city to deal with the owner of such a place if known? And if so, what are we doing? That's item 2. Item 3, I have not read the letter myself yet in detail, but I understand the OVN, the Ojai Valley News website, has a letter posted already that will be in hard copy tomorrow's edition? Yeah. That says there is a $30,000 cost involved in a direct elect mayor. And I would like to know what the basis of deriving that number was. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Our next public comment is Greg Gamble.
Thank you. I'm Greg Gamble, the Executive Director of the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy. I live at 401 Golden West Avenue in Ojai. And I was just here to thank the city and Rob Clark and Greg Grant in particular for some proactive work that they're doing on a project that's unfolding today and tomorrow. Just backing up, I don't know if you realize that the city of Ojai is extremely progressive when it comes to open space and parks for the community. Nearly 10% of the land within the city limits is actually managed as open space for the residents and visitors. This creates a situation where a lot of our residential areas or neighborhoods serve as de facto trailheads for some of these places. And so when the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy acquired the Valley View Preserve up above Shelf Road, we saw a number of people who were enjoying this place, and some of them were driving their cars up to the top of Signal Road at the north end of Signal Road. And anticipating that there was going to be some potential conflicts, Greg Grant worked, and Rob also worked to come up with a local residents and come up with a sign plan and some parking management that is making the place much more user friendly. And I just wanted to thank the city for their long-sightedness in doing that. Thank you. I cede the last minute and 20 seconds of my time to Mr. Leary.
Thank you, Mr. Gamble. And just going back to Mr. Quillisi, if Mr. McClary, if you could get a response from Mr. Quillisi about those 3 concerns, and then also in regards to 30,000, I hope we could get an answer for that.
Absolutely. Was planning on getting some information following up with Mr. Quillisi. Be happy to do that.
Deborah Pendry, sorry.
Thank you, Councilmember Laura. Deborah Pendry, 309 Riverside Road, Oakview, representing the Ojai Valley Green Coalition. And continuing with the water conversation, but coming at it from a different angle, I'd like to share that October is Energy Awareness Month. And the Green Coalition continues to remind ourselves and the public of the energy-water connection. The extraction, treatment, distribution, and use of water, followed by the collection and treatment of wastewater, requires a lot of energy, to the tune of about 19% in the state of California. Likewise, the production of energy, particularly hydroelectric and thermometric power generation, requires a lot of water. And hydroelectric is about 5% of our local power mix. So saving energy saves water. Water is used to turn turbines for hydropower, to produce steam for thermometric power, and to cool equipment by absorbing the waste heat produced by power generation. Saving water saves energy. Energy is used in 5 stages in the water cycle: extracting and conveying. Extracting water from rivers and lakes, or pumping it from aquifers, and then conveying it over hills and into storage facilities is a highly energy-intensive process. Now, we're not connected to the State Water Project, but it is about 2 to 3% of all the electricity consumed in the state of California. Number 2, treating water. Water treatment facilities use energy to pump and process water. Distributing water. Energy is used to transport water. Using water. End users consume energy to treat water with softeners or filters, to circulate and pressurize water with circulation pumps and irrigation systems, and of course to heat and cool water. Collecting and treating wastewater. Energy is used to pump wastewater to the treatment plant and to aerate and filter it at the plant. On average, wastewater treatment in California uses 500 to 1,500 kilowatt hours per acre foot. By reducing the amount of water we use, we lessen our demand on the energy-intensive systems that deliver and treat water. For some one-on-one education regarding energy and water saving, the Coalition invites the public to our 6th annual Green Living Home Tour and Show on Saturday, October 25th. Details can be found at ohivalleyggreentour.com. That's ohivalleyggreentour.com. And as a side note, we will also be at Ojai Day this Saturday for our 6th annual hosting of our bike valet, which we peaked at 125 bikes last year. So every year it gets bigger and we take up more space and it's great. Ride your bike to Ojai. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you. Paul Garth.
Good evening, Mayor Lara, council members and staff. Paul Garth, 609 Kenyatta Street. 3 items tonight. Wednesday, September 17, which was just passed at 7 p.m., was our 7th annual Ojai Valley OK Drill. The numbers were a little light this year. 600 signs were counted Ojai Valley-wide within 1 hour and communicated to the Ojai Police Department by ham radio. We asked Steve Bennett's office for another CERT class in the fall to see if we can increase our numbers. We do thank the Ojai Valley residents for their participation. I'm sure there was way more than 600 signs. The Sunday Farmers Market before the drill is always my annual effort to hand out signs, and we have a 70% retention rate. For those residents who live in Ojai, 70% had their signs from prior years and just needed the instruction. We also have quite a few tourists in Ojai on Sunday, so they all get signs as well, just for good measure. Second topic, on a more serious note, I live on Kenyatta Street, and there was a pepper tree that landed clear across Emily Street. It was a perfect disaster because nobody was hurt, no building damage, no personal damage, nothing at all. It just landed clear across the street. Our concern as neighbors was that there were several other trees also scheduled to land across the street as well. I spoke to Steve McClary the next day, and he escalated to Director of Public Works, Greg Grant, and within a couple of weeks, both trees are now completely removed. So the neighbors are sighing a kind of a breath of relief. So I appreciate the city and Steve McClary and Greg Grant and also his staff for resolving that issue and removing it. The last topic is the Great California Shakeout, which is Thursday, October 16, so in 2 days, and it's always at 10:16. So whatever the date is, 10:16 at 10:16 a.m. And this is Paul's public service announcement. I usually do this every year this time. It is 3 things: drop, cover, and hold on. It is not think what I'm going to do, drop, cover, and hold on. All right? It's not maybe I could get to that doorway. It's I'm getting underneath that table. That's a drop, cover, get underneath, and hold on to one of the legs. An 8.1 magnitude earthquake, that table is going to be over there with me holding on to it. So for all of you in front of me, it's where you are, drop, cover, and hold on. There is about 10 million people registered. People can go to shakeout.org for more information and also to register. Then there's online videos and PDFs and all kinds of information. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Cookie, if I'm reading, Miley?
No, that's not the order.
That's not the order, it's
That's-
bills first.
Oh, I see how you guys did this. Oh, there, I took it apart. Okay, Bill Miley.
Hi, good evening again, Bill Miley. The general subject of the presentation that you're going to hear is on the city's rural community zoning and its wildland interface. There are 6 of us who are going to present public comments, and I'm number 1. I'm a member of a new group. We are the North Signal Street neighbors. We have a post office box, 995, Ojai 93024. We have a major problem in the North community. We are at the edge of the city's rural community wildland interface. The parcel of concern is 1105 North Signal Street. It was recently sold. It's known as the Old Kelly property going back into the late 50s. Its current and planned development is a problem. In our opinion, this 8-acre plus parcel is being urbanized, especially the building of a 6-foot plus concrete wall, in some cases higher than 6 feet, on the south side of Valley View Road. This is the road to Pratt Trailhead and the Stewart Creek debris basin, which protects the city of Ojai from flooding. This was built without a zoning review permit for aesthetics and without a building permit for ingress, egress within the wall or for a section which is a retaining wall. There is also a historical question as to where the property frontage is located. We know this is a private road and it's been deeded for access easements since the mid-1940s. We have located most of these deeds and have presented them to the city for review. We did that Friday. There are at least 10 to 12 of these deeded easements which overlay each other and raise questions about property locations, easement encroachments, and inconsistencies. We argue that the 6-foot wall should be turned into a 3-foot wall at the least, as a frontage wall. However, there is a bigger question. Walling off the rural edge of our wildland interface boundary doesn't fit our city's beliefs, policies, guidelines found in our city's general plan, especially the land use plan, land use element. We continue our vigilance and effort to keep the city, the unique city of Ojai. My last comment is on needed improvements in city codes. There are 3 changes in city codes that we have identified and we would like the council and staff to work on. 1, taking the planned development overlay zoning which we have and applying it to large single-family parcels, ones that are like 2 acres and beyond. We have a bunch of those. 2, permits for all required walls, all walls requiring a building permit, and the establishment of a minimum length footage for property frontage requirements. There is none now. And Santa Barbara, as an example, has a whole set of them. If you're 2 acres, it has to be 100 feet. If you're 1 acre, it has to be 70 feet. So we're giving you some work which we'll take to help you with, and thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
And now number 2.
Mr. McCleary, Mr. Miley is saying that a 6-foot wall doesn't need a permit. Is that correct? I thought 6-foot walls needed to have engineering drawings and permits.
I believe that's correct.
Okay, maybe you can check that out. And also, have permits already been issued for this, or has this already been built?
If I may,
Yeah.
please, I guess, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, a wall that is not a retaining wall doesn't require a permit if it's 6 feet or shorter. So if it serves as a retaining wall, then it does require engineering. And this wall has already been built.
Okay.
In question.
Did it require a permit?
No, because it's there may be some, Ms. Wold can maybe give a little more information, but the bulk, there's one section being redesigned because it deals with an access point, but the portions of the wall that are not retaining walls don't require permits.
Then obviously they're saying that this is on a side yard rather than a front, because
Yes, we analyzed
front
it.
yard setbacks or front yards within a setback can only be 3
Right.
feet.
Yeah, I've worked with the staff. It's clear that the property line we're dealing with is a side yard under our code. It's a side yard doesn't have to mean an interior lot. There's a corner lot has a side yard and a front yard. The issue here is because this lot is a flag lot, is a very narrow street frontage. But under our code, clearly the portion that's on the public right-of-way, which is the street, is treated as the front. And that's where the setbacks are. So this is a side yard, and side yards do permit 6-foot walls and fences on the side yard, even though it happens to be abutting an easement that is used. And there's a very question about whether it's a
public easement, a prescriptive easement, private easement. It has a very, very interesting title history to it.
Okay.
But in terms of our code in front yards and side yards, it's clearly a side yard. It doesn't mean I'm not disagreeing that as applied to this particular case, in certain properties or sections of the community, there may be a good grounds for a different standard. That may be so, but for this property, we concluded that it's a side yard, and therefore a 6-foot wall or fence is permissible.
Okay,
Any more
thank you.
questions? This is, I guess, a sequence of speakers on this specific issue, so I would like to hear all of them speak, remember, try to limit your comments to 3 minutes. Our next speaker is Terry Moore.
My name's Terry Moore, and thank you for having us, and I live on North Signal Street as well. And I didn't have a prepared speech, let's say, but this issue of the wall is, and a lot of the other things that have gone out on this property is a huge issue for the city, not just for the moment, for the future of Ojai. And almost all of us, or I'd say all of us in the room, appreciate the fact that we live here. And what I wanted to use as an example of the way things are going here, and my wife and I happen to have young kids, and we've noticed that in the 10 years we've been here, that about a third of our friends with kids have left town. So what's happening is the dynamics of the town are changing, and money is ruling. And this is an example that I think you're all familiar with, and this is from Malibu. And this seems far away to us, here in Little Ojai. But this is the guitar player for U2, who's been trying to subdivide and build on a ridgeline in Malibu. He has been tied up in litigation for, some 5 years or so. But he'll probably win. He'll probably get exactly what he wants because he has a tremendous amount of money and a tremendous amount of influence, with the right people. Well, the same thing is going on here right now in our town, and the classic example is 1105 North Signal Street. It's exactly the same. And it's total disregard. I'm talking in general now, not about specific individuals, but it's total disregard for the city, for the environment. It's total insensitivity to what Ojai is, or in this case, Malibu. And our world has shrunk to such a degree, and the rich have gotten richer, and they seem to be ruling the roost at all of our expense. And we as a city need to wake up and deal with these issues. Because half the stuff that's gone on up there went on piecemeal. There was no master plan. There were 80 trees cut down, that's my guess. They said, that's not a problem. We're going to replace them with 1,200 new plants and trees. Well, where are you going to get the water? We have our own well. How much can one person do? And I'm applying this to all cases. The other thing is, the issue of the well itself is, we've all looked into this in great detail. I personally believe that that wall is totally illegal because the city doesn't really know what the parameters are, what the easement says in the corners of the lot. No one really knows. Bill Wiley knows more than anybody, and he couldn't figure it out. So now the city's surveying. But the point is, there's another issue with setback and public right-of-way, and this is something I'd really like to understand. We were told the other day by Kathy Wald that you could build on an easement right on the line. But if it's public access, you can't. Well, that road that has various names that we're talking about, the road that runs in front of the property, is public easement to the homeowners that live beyond it, to the flood control basin, and the Forest Service trail. So for the city to say that's not public access, it's totally wrong. It is public access.
Well, thank you,
So
Mr. Moore.
those are the issues I wanted to bring up.
Okay, thank you. I can't read this writing, but Cookie Miles?
Miley.
Miley?
Hello, council people. Thank you for letting us speak. I haven't been up here since we had our bed and breakfast routine about 10 years ago. We had a group from our street who didn't want a lot of cars going up and down on this really narrow road. Anyway, I have 4 thoughts from a good friend I'd like to read. A government that includes its citizens in active constructive collaboration, creating a healthy community is encouraged and necessary. Number 2, all citizens should be treated equally, fairly, and with respect. Number 3, all citizens are obligated to follow the same laws. And the 4th, a property owner should be able to enhance his or her property based on the laws of the community. So we've lived here on our house for 35 years. We love the peace of the nearby trail that we have enjoyed over the years, but things are changing. And I urge you to consider, I know you can't do it tonight, an immediate stop work issue to be issued for the 1105 North Signal Street project until all these issues have been resolved, such as permits for historical, cultural, and environmental concerns, to be sure they're all in full compliance. Thank you.
Thank you. Katrina McLaughlin?
Hi, I'm Katrina McLaughlin. I live at 911 North Signal. And I am here with concerns about the 1105 North Signal property. There is a wall that does exceed height codes, absolutely. And the entranceway, the front of the street, actually has a fire hydrant in the middle of it. And there's just no way that somebody could actually enter the property that way. It has always been entered through that side road. This is also the road that the Oaks uses to walk their patrons up for many, many years. The reason I moved on this street was because I used to walk up Signal and then go over to Pratt Trail that way, and I thought, I really want to live on this street. It's so beautiful. It looks like a penitentiary. It looks like a jail. And it used to be, we could look through it and see green. And the reason why the height requirements, I believe, for the wall exist are so that we don't take the green space away from all of our neighbors. There's construction on Saturday, consistently. They've cut down oak trees without permits. They haven't asked a cultural representative to come and see if there's something archaeological of importance. There's a tennis court that is being built that will most likely, if they choose to play during the evening, need lighting. And this is very concerning, especially for the people that live above them. I really strongly urge you to stop the work on this project and look at it and really consider how it's affecting the beauty of our city. It's very upsetting for us as property owners. You know, we paid a pretty penny for that property, and the reason why was so that we could be near the city and still walk on the trails. And they divided that property into 4 properties from 1 property to start with, and now we've got this gregarious, crazy building going on. Not to mention that our street has not been paved. There are potholes, and there's all these trucks coming up, concrete trucks, and constant noise, which of course people are allowed to build on their property. But there seems like there's just something wrong about this. It doesn't seem right. It seems really wrong for our city. And I would just please urge you to consider taking a look at this. Everyone is very upset. people, not only that live on the street, that hike here, that have lived here. It's very important to our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Don Thindling? Tiedling, sorry.
Good evening, council members. My name is Dawn Teeting. I'm a resident of North Signal Street. Over 5 years ago, I came to Ojai for the first time and was deeply moved by the beauty of the valley. It was and is obvious that Ojai is a place that cares about the environment and its people and its heritage of those people. I moved to Ojai to be a part of this unique place with people who care. I stand before you tonight to call attention to activities at 1105 North Signal Street, the old Kelly Estate. Over the past few months, I have witnessed extensive grading, excavation, and building activities, the removal of trees, and the erection of nearly 7-foot cinder block walls on the perimeter of the property. I now feel like I live in an urban assault zone. 1105 North Signal Street is a unique property. The property lines the road that accesses the Pratt Trailhead and is 8 acres in size. The area is designated as very sensitive on the archaeological sensitivity map of the Ventura County General Plan and contains a registered archaeological site. Ojai City Ordinance and California law, known as the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, require assessment of a project's potential environmental impact before the project starts. I have been informed by the city that these laws do not apply for this project. On Friday, I submitted a letter to the Community Development Director requesting re-review of this project and have requested that each of you receive a copy. The scope and magnitude of environmental change at 1105 are extensive. There is potential for significant adverse impact on the environment of Ojai's cultural resources. Once an archaeological site is destroyed, it's too late. Ojai's history and the history of its people are gone forever. Not only are laws not being followed, decisions being made by the city are inconsistent with the conservation element of the Ojai General Plan, which is, quote, to provide for the long-term preservation or proper scientific investigation of all known and potential cultural resources. On October 10th, I respectfully requested the city reevaluate its decision and applicability of CEQA. The city is responsible for identifying and mitigating potential impacts to the cultural resources sites, tribally significant properties, and the environment. Today, I stand before you and urge you to consider an immediate stop work order for the 1105 North Signal Street project until all issues have been resolved. Thank you.
Patrick, you're going to have to help me. Tumamaya?
Yes, my name is Patrick Tumamayat. I live here in the Ojai Valley at 992 El Camino Corto. I'm a paid licensed consultant regarding Native Chumash resources in the area. As my profession, I monitor archaeological sites during construction, so on and so forth, and whatever advice or recommendations I'm asked, I get involved with that. In question at this property at North Signal regarding the archaeological site, according to the city, this property was mitigated as a ministerial, meaning insignificant. In my opinion, it's not. This particular site sits above the perimeter of 2 adjacent pieces of property which I was involved with when they did some studies there. Because of these 2 studies, we found some significant artifacts, what they call lithic scatter. It was low density, but that's not the actual site. The actual site is where the property is now, what we're talking about, up on the knoll. And according to what I understand of this property, the existing home is small compared to what they want to build on this property. From what I understand, this new house, square footage-wise, is 6,000 square feet, probably compared to something that's way less than that. So what you're doing is you're impacting native soils on the perimeter of the existing house, which is going to impact more of the archaeological site. And in my opinion, in my profession, in something like that, in those kind of circumstances, you're losing a ton of more information that's in regards to that site. So in my opinion, they're out of compliance, really, in my opinion, that there should be further investigation, what they call extended phase one, and extended phase one, if there's significant reason to go into a phase two in those findings, then it should go into a phase two and possibly what they call a phase three, and that's a recovery. And it should be monitored by an archaeologist and a Native American monitor on site. And I ask you guys to, withdraw any kind of permit that may issue these people to go forward. Thanks again.
Thank you. And I just want to comment and remind the council that this is public comment, and we're not going to get into this issue just because it's not agenda-sized, but we do want to address it, and I want to make sure that we do follow up with these issues. So, and I don't know if any of the council had any questions?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say that the information that's just been given to us is extremely disturbing from a couple of matters. One is that there's, from what I'm hearing, the appearance that it's who you know. If you depending on who you know, you can get things done, or how much you want to pay, you can get things done, and that's clearly not the case in this city. And even though I have no idea, I don't know anything about the project whatsoever, but if permits have been issued, they may be permits that have been issued clearly inconsistent with our code. But I agree with one of the speakers that if it doesn't seem right, it probably isn't, because our codes in Ojai aren't just on the books for being on the books. They're on the books because we are attempting to keep our small town character. And if something's going on that isn't keeping that, then probably there's something wrong. We can't do anything about it tonight. All we can do is refer it to staff and ask them to look at it. And it's not before the council, and the council may not have any power to act on it at any rate until it comes before us in some format that we can act on. But it is very disturbing to hear an entire neighborhood that's upset with this.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Councilwoman.
Yeah, I would also like to say that enough has been said tonight to make me really want to take note and find out what's going on.
Well,
so I would like to do something to make it more
I'd like to
clear.
ask if our Community Development Director, Kathleen Wold, could come up and just briefly give a couple of factual responses.
We can't do that. It's not an itemized.
It's not agenda-sized, right?
She can give some brief response, to just briefly answer a few questions to give you a little information, not for you to discuss or debate it, but just to respond a little bit, it would be fine.
Okay.
Just very, as we said, very briefly.
Okay.
Good evening. Am I on here? Okay, so there were a lot of comments and questions. Let me see. Let me go from the very beginning. So there is a fence that was being constructed out there, and it didn't require a building permit, but as you know, fences require conformance with the zoning regulations. So we had to do a zoning conformance check on it, and it turned out that it didn't meet, and there was a stop work order placed on that fence. So we've been working with the neighborhood and the applicant, the property owner, her representative, to try to resolve those issues with the fence, which resulted in them applying for a building permit because it actually is over 6 feet high in some places. So that has not been relieved yet. I mean, we haven't released that particular stop work order yet. We're still working on issuing that. So back in the fall of 2013, the interim community development director at the time, Ann McLaughlin, issued a director's exemption for a house, tennis courts, a rock climbing building, and some other improvements on the property. Did not include the fence, but there were other things that she issued a director's exemption for, which means that it was ministerial. And so the folks are all telling you today is that I've told them it's a ministerial review. Under CEQA, the Public Resources Code of the State of California, CEQA does not apply to ministerial projects. They're considered exempt because, as the gentleman said, they are ministerial, meaning that they're smaller and they don't have impacts. That's what it's all about. So with that said, the applicant is proposing a much larger house, and we're working with him, and he knows that when he comes in for the much larger house, he'll have to go through design review, which is a discretionary permit, because it's, as you kind of getting into a lot of detail here, but that's kind of the system as we're going through it, okay? So let's see, and that's kind of where we are right now. When they come in for a discretionary permit for the house that they're proposing, they'll have full CEQA review, and they'll have, go through the planning commission, that type of thing. So does that kind of give an overall view of where we are with it?
I think so. And if I may ask, also, if we could just follow up, direct staff about the working on the weekends and doing that kind of enforcement.
We've been following with it.
And the trees and et cetera, and the archaeological zoning and all that. It just doesn't apply. I'm just saying it because it also applies to anyone else that's doing this type of work, that we should enforce our codes and our rules. So, and yes, Councilwoman Clapp.
This is another director's exemption. There's been so many director's exemptions that seem to have been done in a somewhat wanton manner prior to you. And this really concerns me, this director's exemption thing. This is how we almost ended up with a cell tower. There's something else that we had a director's exemption for that was just unbelievably outrageous. And director's exemptions, I don't recall, have we dealt with this kind of laissez-faire director's exemption thing? Do you recall? Paul?
I don't. But I do want to remember that this is a public comment.
But this is, I understand.
And it is disturbing, I understand.
But if this director, I think that if there isn't a policy about director's exemptions that is a little bit more strict, that we maybe address this in a future agenda item.
Yeah.
Definitely. I definitely appreciate your comments, and I do appreciate the brief.
Is that good? Is it
yes.
answer all the questions?
And
okay.
Yes, thank you.
And if also I expect probably to be on the code enforcement list and so forth. So we'll keep a good eye on it, and I invite the people that made the public comments just to keep working with the city, because we want to make sure that we do enforce our code and that we do keep a small character. So I appreciate your comments. Thank you. Moving on to other public comments.
One other thing, I'd like to have an agenda item on these directors' exemptions. I think it's really important. You know, I've seen so many times in the last 4.5 years where, in my opinion, the director should have given an exemption, and instead it's had to go to the full planning commission. And now we're looking at a major project that appears to have gotten a director's exemption when this is one that should have gone. There's got to be some sort of a check and balance to the director, and I think that it's something important enough that we get this on a future agenda.
Thank you, Councilman Blatz, for
our next speaker
seconding that motion.
Is William Ulrich.
Good evening, William Ulrich, 487 Gridley Road, and in the interest of transparency and disclosure, I'm a candidate for school board. Golden State Water San Antonio well number 6, per Golden State's own spreadsheet reports, is deemed not equipped. This appears to state that the well is not producing. Did the city manager, Mr. Clark, ever obtain actual production reports that are required by the state of California to be reported under penalty of perjury from Golden State? And if so, where are they? Why is Golden State Water buying and charging for so much water from Casitas District? What are the implications for readiness of this condition for the fire, water, and fire hydrant system of the city? On another matter, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself as a candidate and also my fellow candidates for both school board and city council, Section 10-2.1601 and Ordinance 801 of the year 2008 of the City of Ojai is, in my opinion, unenforceable in whole and in part as an unreasonable infringement upon protected First Amendment's political speech. Specifically, this is the Ojai political sign ordinance. Why, then, is this ordinance being enforced with no due process by the Ojai Public Works Department? Doesn't the Public Works employees have anything better to do with city funds? Last Friday, 10/10, the Public Works Department removed all political signage from Gridley Road between Ojai Avenue and Grand Avenue, including my sign from my personal sign, I guess I'd characterize it, from my front yard. This was a critical weekend for candidates following the delivery of mail-in ballots on Wednesday, 10/8. Now, I recognize there's a 40-foot wide area that the city considers to be the right-of-way. However, my sign was placed 22 feet at its nearest point from the center line. This is an egregious and unnecessary state action on the part of the city. Perhaps, as is the case with several suspended city ordinances, the council would direct the city manager to cease and desist this enforcement activity until after the November 4 election, in the interests of fairness. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ulrich.
Mr. Fletcher, it seems to me that you have concluded that there may be a constitutional problem with the sign permit fee.
Yes, the sign permit fee as well as any content control on the signage. It's different from the question of placing signs in the public right-of-way. And the only thing that the city is enforcing is the placing of any signs, not just political signs, any signs or other unauthorized encroachments in the right-of-way.
And isn't it true also that anybody that is paid a sign permit fee, that you've directed the city that those fees be refunded?
Yes, that's my understanding. The staff is already arranging to refund any fees that were paid. I think for the current campaign.
Right.
Yes, and one more question.
Excuse me, when I would like to emphasize one aspect of that, if the ordinance is unenforceable in part, is unenforceable in whole, okay, until you guys take action. At this particular point, regardless of the permit fee collection. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I could direct staff to follow up with Mr. Ulrich on that? And
Certainly.
Yeah.
Fletcher, do you have something to say on that matter?
I'm not, as a general principle of law, that's not correct. We all have severability clauses in our ordinances. If any provision is held invalid, it doesn't affect the invalidity of another provision. So that's wouldn't be so.
So you're basically saying if one part of the ordinance is not valid, the other doesn't make the whole ordinance gone?
That's correct. And we
You can
specifically
still enforce the part that is valid and legal?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Our next public comment is Bob Daddy.
Good evening. It seems like we got a lot of problems with our ordinances. We write them, you don't enforce them, we write them where they're contradictory. So I looked up Ordinance 811, just so I can make it easy on everybody. That's the vacant building ordinance, and I filed a formal complaint. So I went in to find out about my formal complaint, and I asked a couple of questions, which made me furious. I said, we have a formal complaint. When is this going to take action? And it's, well, we're going to work with them. Well, we've been working with these people for 20 years. You have an ordinance that doesn't have any specific action. It doesn't say we're going to send a letter, we're going to do this. So they sent a letter. And I said, did you send it registered? And the answer was no. I said, so when does the time frame start? Well, we're going to give them some time. Then what? When does the time run out? So when we write ordinances, could you do something about having some language that's understandable and make them work? Because they just have stopped working. We've had this for a long time. So we've got a vacant building for more than 90 days with chain link around it. How much more time do we need to work with people? And how much time are we going to give them? And I mean, this thing just goes on and on and on. And when or what do we need to do to stop this nonsense? Now, I know our attorney here did not write that. I know the attorney that wrote it before. I got to tell you what, we need some better review over what we're putting on the books before we put them on the books. And we need to be able to have some input and ask these things. Because they don't have teeth. They don't have teeth, deadlines, timelines. And with that, I would like you to look at, and I know we're not going to talk about it, which doesn't really matter, item 2. You have something that is totally unintelligible. This is the kind of thing that this Florida state sued the city and county for putting out things that were not understandable by ordinary citizens. And so I asked a bunch of people what this item is. Fairly intelligent people, a whole bunch of people back here. None of them knew what this item was. So when you put these things on the agenda, I don't think the city should have the right to discuss what hasn't been explained ahead of time to the citizens what a text amendment is. You didn't tell us anything. So I'd like you to reject this, skip it, and go buy it. Repost it, explain what it is, and tell us. Okay, very simple.
And Bob, we are going to talk about item number 2, so when it comes up and you want to talk more about it, you're more than welcome to do so.
Okay.
So we are going to address it.
Mr. Mayor, I'm the one that introduced the blighted building ordinance 4.5 years ago. And one of the things that I wanted to do, and I think that is 808, Mr. Fletcher. I remember when we introduced that ordinance and passed it, there was a lot of public input on it. But if we don't have it with deadlines as to when we're going to be notifying the owners and how long they have to do the various things, we need to get that in, and I'd like it to come back before the council on a future agenda item for review and maybe modification. The other thing, though, is that it seemed to me that in that ordinance, there was a portion of it that had to do with the building having to be on the market, as I recall. And if that is there, I want to make sure that we look at it again from the standpoint of whether it's on the market at a reasonable price or we have it on the market for a certain period of time before whatever the penalties that we're going to apply consistent with the ordinance begin to kick in. Because I think that it had to be on the market, but I don't think that there was anything that had to be related to price as long as it was on the market, and therefore it could sit on the market forever and pull it out of the blighted building ordinance itself. So I haven't reviewed it lately, but it's come up at a couple of the candidates' forums, and I think it's probably time for us to bring it back before the council.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Councilwoman Clapp.
You know, when we're talking about enforcement and timeframes and mechanisms to make sure an ordinance is enforced, this isn't just with this ordinance. This is with all ordinances throughout all of our books. So maybe what we need to do is have on the agenda, how are we going to deal with each ordinance and the mechanism in which to enforce it? Because if we do put it on the books as an ordinance, there should be a mechanism for enforcement. So maybe this needs to be an overall view.
And I agree. I agree with that. I think we do need to look at code enforcement and how we do make sure that whatever we ordinance or whatever is following through. So, and that's the last public comment. Does anybody else have any more comments to make before I move on? No? Next on our item is our consent calendar. Do I hear a motion or?
Move to approve.
Second.
Roll call?
Latz?
Yes.
Clap? Yes. Laura?
Yes. And now, moving into our agenda, I decided to pull item 6 before 2, and this is the appointment of the Art Commission, considering ratification of Pamela Grau to serve the Art Commission, on the Arts Commission for the term to end May 2016, and Bobby Balderman to serve on the Arts Commission for a term to end May 2018. And I don't know if Chair Golden wants to make just a few comments on the candidates
I do, of course.
or the appointments.
I do. I told them to be sure to be here at 7 o'clock because the meeting would probably go fast.
We just started our agenda.
Sorry.
Would it be all right to have the candidates come up?
Definitely.
Come on down, ladies. To my right is Pamela Grau. I'm going to start with just giving you a little bit of information about Pamela. But before I do, I want to comment that the interviews and the process for Arts Commission has become quite competitive. We have had 4 candidates in each of the last 2 rounds, and everyone is highly qualified. And the decisions have been agonizing because we would like to just expand the commission and take everybody on. But we're so excited to recommend to you Pamela and Bobby, and let me tell you a little bit about them so that you know why we're so excited. I'll start with Pamela. Pamela has a BA in art history, and she has done graduate studies at the Art Center College of Design. She is a member of the Orange County Center for Contemporary Art, and while there, I think it was over a course of 10 years or so, she was in charge of all the exhibitions. She also has worked alongside one of my favorite artists in the whole world, the notable Judy Chicago, on a community art project. She has experience, we are so happy to find out, with grant writing. Pamela also developed downtown Santa Ana into an internationally acclaimed art hub, and she would like to bring some of those ideas here to Ojai and work on Ojai's blighted downtown areas, and she also has ideas for pop-up art events to take place monthly downtown. So we are so excited at the energy and the ideas and the expertise that she's going to bring onto the commission. So that's Pamela. Wow. Now we move to Bobby Balderman. As if this isn't enough, we have this one over here. Bobby studied design at UCLA. She's a recently retired graphics art teacher at Santa Barbara Community College, and she's a past board member of Performances to Grow On, a program that takes place here in Ojai that we all love and that we actually support with our grants program. Here in Ojai, Bobby worked with the Youth Foundation. She was the director of the youth media agency Generation Communications. Under her leadership, Gen Com won multiple awards. And as director, Bobby provided opportunities for students to explore web and graphic design, writing, video, photography, and drama. So she's touched all those areas of art. She also spearheaded public education campaigns for nonprofits and government programs, and she's very experienced and knows how to dig and find resources such as grant opportunities. She'll add depth and experience to our student programs that we run, and we're going to put her to work expanding our public education outreach program. So I present to you for your consideration and the recommendation. The interviewers, in addition to myself, were Paul Blatz, Councilman Blatz, and Mayor Strobel, and we were unanimous in recommending these 2 candidates for your consideration. Any questions?
I just want to add, in terms of these 2 new members, highly qualified. I was so impressed by both of you, and I was impressed by all of the applicants. but when it came down to it, the two of you impressed us all the most. And I'm just thrilled that you're going to be on our Arts Commission. So, welcome. Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, I would like, this is a discussion item. I guess we need to see if anybody
Open
has
it.
anything to say.
Yes.
If not,
If not, does anybody from the public wish to make a comment? No?
okay, in light of that, I would like to move to ratify the appointment of Pamela Graw to serve on the Arts Commission for a term to end May 2016, and Bobby Balderman to serve on the Arts Commission for a term to end May 2018.
I'll
Second.
second. Roll call?
Latz?
Yes.
Clap?
Yes.
Laura?
Yes, and congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I do have to say, I was going to refrain, but my sister worked with Bobby on the Youth Foundation, and she's loved it ever since, and that's what she does as a professional career, is graphic design, so thank you. Moving back to our second item, text amendment to the Ojai Municipal Code amending Section 9 of Ordinance 840 adopted by City Council May 13, 2014. I'll refer it back to staff for the presentation.
Thank you, Councilmember Lara. Community Development Director Wold will be making the staff report and presentation.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm going to start by kind of doing a little bit backpedaling here and try to explain to you what a text amendment is, since we had some conversation about that earlier tonight. So a text amendment, which is what this project is before you tonight, is a text amendment to the Ojai Municipal Code, in which we would change part of the actual zoning ordinance to have a different wording than it has right now. So that's what a text amendment is. It's just changing the text of the zoning ordinance. And with that, we'd like to go back to May 13th, 2014, which was just earlier this year, in which the City Council voted to adopt Ordinance 840, which changed the height limit for here in Ojai. And it took it from 30 feet down to 25 feet, and added a requirement for single-family, single-story structures exceeding 24 feet in height to be subject to a design review permit, and a solar access height limit. And as we know, we talked about that earlier tonight, what requires design review and what doesn't. And one of the few things that we have that is automatically exempt from design review are single-family homes that are single-story. And in this case, it changed that to require design review if you were 24 feet or higher. And we would just like to point out that as what happens often when we have zoning text amendments is that, unbeknownst to staff or well, I should just say to staff, there are lots of people who use existing code to make their designs, and they have put money into it, and that's what happened in this case, and that's what the report goes on to explain, that there was a gentleman, Mr. Fred Fisher, who had applied for a design review permit for his two-story, single-family home, which is 30 feet in height, and he did that in May, and it just so happened that he was not through the permitting process and had not pulled, through the entitlement or pulled a building permit prior to you adopting this new height limit. And as such, without any provision in the ordinance that you adopted to grandfather him in, he was now subject to the new height limit, which was 25 feet, even though he had submitted in May at 30 feet. So with that, we just explain in the staff report here that you do allow some provisions to go up to 30 feet for architectural projections, but you're not allowed to have any additional habitable space over the 25 feet. And he does have that. He has 1.5 feet. So what the Planning Commission took action to approve his project, determining that he wasn't subject to the new ordinance. However, he was and is and will continue to be unless we adopt this text amendment altering the effectiveness of the ordinance. And really all we're doing tonight is changing the simple phrase in the ordinance to, and I've got to read it here for you, which says, any project that was submitted to the city prior to June 13th, 2014, which was the effective date of the original ordinance adopted by City Council shall be exempt from the provisions of Section 2 of this ordinance, and Section 2 would be the height limitation of 25 feet, and instead, the building height standards existing prior to the adoption of Ordinance 840 shall be applicable. Further, the provisions of Section 3, which are the solar height sections, shall become effective January 1st, 2015. So what I'm saying here is, or I should explain this to you, that the ordinance already had a provision to have some of the ordinance become effective later on, which was January 1st, 2015. That did not include the overall height limit. So what's before you tonight is just that you add this provision that would allow anybody who was already had submitted into the city for entitlements utilize the old existing height limitations. And that's all we're doing tonight. And I'm open to any questions you may have or further clarifications of our project.
Thank you, Ms. Wolt. Does any of the council members have
Yes,
any questions?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, but Councilwoman
I was
Lott.
wondering, Kathleen, are there any other projects in the pipeline other than this one?
Not that we know of. I mean, I should clarify and say that there are projects that have been in the pipeline for, we have a list of incomplete projects that have been around for a long time in the city of Ojai. There may be something in one of those that may, this height may affect, but not that I'm aware of. We went through and we would make you aware if there were a lot out there. We don't know of any other than this one in particular that is that close to the height limit. So I can't think of anything. We kind of went through it, so that's my best answer to it.
Well, the one I can think of is Mallory Way, but I'm not sure of any other projects.
So as we did a lot of research on this to make sure that the application was, subject to the new ordinance, and the city attorney made it very clear to us that really the only way to find yourself not subject to it would be to have either a development agreement or a vesting tentative map or something of that nature. So the only thing that I can really think of would be that if there was somebody, so for instance, we've had the, is it Jim Miller property at 510 Ojai has been extended since 1994. Something of that nature where he hasn't pulled a building permit and, that might pop up. But other than that, I can't think of anything that is out there, and I don't really know. That's been around for a long time, like 20 years, so I don't know of anything current in the pipeline.
Thank you. Any other questions? I do have a question about the staff report. So you said that during this process, you did make them aware that the height of the building, this new ordinance was coming in, right?
Yes, and we talked with early on with Mr. Fisher's representative, and so I don't know what exactly got conveyed back to him through when people have agents that represent property owners. We talk to whoever they send in, and we certainly did make him aware of the ordinance. But to the extent I believed he really felt genuinely that it wasn't going to apply to him because he submitted, and that's how a lot of people feel about it. If they submitted into the city, they kind of made it into the deadline, and that unfortunately isn't really how the law reads.
Okay, but you guys did make it clear
Yes,
that this was
we
okay.
did, uh-huh.
And then the second question is, why wasn't this provision added from the beginning, other than it? And why was the solar in the solar height that wouldn't be affected till January?
I don't know. I wasn't here when you originally started this process. Maybe Joe might know. I don't know.
No, I actually don't know. The solar height was added after we did first did the 25-foot limit, then we added the solar discussion, and I remember some conversations about that needing to be phased in, but I don't have a recollection. Maybe council members are better than me that there just wasn't a discussion about pipeline projects. It does happen, not uncommon, but this is it's not that often you get something that's so close to the deadline as you do with this one, and so it's unfortunate.
Well, thank you. I am going to open it up to the public, and I do have some public comments, including the property owner, Jenny, could you help me pronounce your last name? Sorry.
My last name is Prebor.
Prebor.
Madam, Mr. Mayor, I'm Mr. Acting Mayor, I recommend you open, this is a public hearing, so actually it's not public comment, so open the public hearing.
I'm going to open a public hearing. There we go. Thank you.
So I can't speak now?
Yes.
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 Okay.
I just had it open.
And I'm not timing the property owner.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to leave this next to Kathleen. I know I read that if you submit something that's part of the review, that I can leave it with the office. I think I should leave it with you, and then.
If you could step next to the mic so that people in the audience and at home could have the pleasure of hearing, because without you being in the mic,
Okay.
they can't hear you. Thank you.
This is material that on the back page of your agenda, it says if you have additional material that's relevant, to leave it with the office for later review. So I'm going to leave the document and the model with Kathleen, and I'll pick it up tomorrow because it may be relevant. I'm Jenny Prebor. My husband's Fred Fisher. My family owns the property at 607 Signal, North Signal. All of my neighbors have left, unfortunately. But we, thank you for letting us speak. We have had support from our neighbors about this project. We acquired this property in 2009, and our sole intent was to build a family home and to restore the badly deteriorated property. We have been working on design since then. It's an almost 10-acre piece of property, as you know, that has significant history and significant, I don't know how, archaeological things that we would restore, from the history of the property, that we would restore and not remove. So we've been working on that. As Kathleen said, yes, the plans were worked on with the intention of creating a design that is at 30 feet. The material that I've left are references to historical references of where the design is coming from. One is the Ventura water restoration that you see as you come up 33. Another one is a Palladian villa from the 1500s, an Irving Gill from the turn of the century, and then as you can see, it has a lower loggia, which is very reminiscent of vernacular architecture in this area. So we submitted it on May 5th of this year. Fred met with the planning staff, and you may want to correct me. I believe that it was with you. I mean, this was after the transition. But Fred met with the planning staff and discussed the project. Fred specifically discussed the proposed 30 feet height limit at a meeting on April 2nd with Planning Director Kathleen and Associate Planning Director Heather. The one issue that I think everyone's brought up that I think is relevant is that there was discussion of appending. I mean, you had published in the Ojai paper that there was a pending discussion of this change, but there were no concrete dates, or no concrete dates that were relayed to us as a family or a property owner, or in these discussions. So yes, there was discussion of it. I just want to see if this I think is what Kathleen, this is what I think the point is that there wasn't at the time a discussion that there was no pipeline, because that was what we found out later was missing from the amendment, or from the ordinance. So now, as was discussed, we are requesting that, the text amendment, or the staff is requesting the text amendment to include that. Now, I have no knowledge of past projects, and, that's already been discussed. I'm here representing our project, our family home. My children are sleeping in the bed. One's asleep and one's patiently waiting. But I'm just here to say that this is relevant and important to us. We've had a lot of support from our neighbors, and as you saw earlier today, there's been construction on our street, and actually from Shelf Road, you can see another site that does have 2 retaining walls that is, I'm sure, has come up as a concern. But we feel very lucky that we have had support from our neighbors, our surrounding neighbors. They've come to the planning committee meeting. You've heard them speak, or the planning commission has heard them speak. We received a unanimous thumbs up from the planning commission for the design, in favor of the design. There were no dissents from any neighbors. The house is not visible from any street. And the critical design of the house that Fred's worked on since 2010 was that there's a mezzanine library that depends on a height of 30 feet. And as I said, the Planning Commission unanimously approved this design. We request that you approve this text amendment to allow this project to move forward. And our planning approval of this project is dependent on this text amendment. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any question from the council? No. Our next speaker card is Bob Daddy.
Yeah. Do you want me to stay? Do you have
Oh,
questions?
no, the next public.
Oh, okay.
Public comment.
Again, we get into all these little ordinances. What I'd like you to consider is a couple of things. I'm not going to get into the text amendment. I think it's disingenuous. It's a lack of representation. What we need to do is we need to have standards. We have 0 standards here. So we're going to start all the laws the first of the year, except this one in the middle of the year on a Tuesday after 6 o'clock. Give the people some standards. We don't have them. We don't have consistent, constant things. So I just think that it's pathetic when we come in and we change things, and I think there needs to be a way, and I've never met this family, never talked to them, but I think if you started a projects take a long time, 2, 3, 4 years sometimes, and you come in and we allow the Gables, which has had a dozen years of drive-bys, and we allow that to go, and one of my really good friends and clients, Jim Miller, gets 20 years, and somebody's in the middle of this, and we don't have a way to say, we're in the process, we're going to start a new law. You now have 12 months or so many months or 18 months or reasonable time to finish this thing. The time is going. You got to get your fees in. You've got to do other things. And then show some words in there that we fail to enforce, which is called substantial progress. So as far as this text amendment, I haven't really followed it, but I am following what we're doing, and what we're doing, I think, is blatantly unfair. When do we start new rules in the middle of the year? And where was the overarching importance to go ahead and adopt this and put this in immediately to stop what? Now, we have our sheriff and we have our fire department, and if you're going to put a law in that says we can't do this for this, no more wood roofs, get it, health, safety, welfare. But when it's a matter of design and aesthetics, I don't really see where we have this crucial importance that we need to whack it off. But again, it's not just this one. We do it with all of our ordinances. I think we need to look at it and come up with some way to make it consistent so people know, so we don't change things in the middle of the year. We always seem to be doing this. Don't really care what it's about. We just seem to do it. We don't have standards. They come in, they get done, they get slapped together, and then we have this pushback. So I think if you only got 3 in the pipeline and it's not going to destroy our small town, kind of tough to slam the door when somebody gets close. And had this thing been pushed out to when the solar was, which is the first of the year, which is generally where laws in California start, is the first of the year. Consider what we're doing. We send a really, really, really bad message to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daddy. Yes,
I'd like to
Councilwoman Clapp.
First of all, it's very common for laws to begin in July in the government fiscal year. I see that routinely. Regarding the surety of zoning and ordinances, and that people need to have something that's there, we know right now. We all know one important thing we learned in civics in school is the Constitution is a living, breathing document. It has the ability to be amended. We have a municipal code that's a living, breathing document that has the ability to be amended. When this body makes policy, we do the best we can, but there's provisions for amendments because things can get overlooked. I just want that clear. We're not sitting up here being malicious. We're not sitting up here intentionally making things difficult for people. We are up here trying to do the best we can to develop policy to help this be a community that we all can live in together in an amicable manner. So I don't appreciate being accused of being negligent about how we make policy.
Thank you, Councilwoman Clapp. Our next speaker card is Steve Quillisi.
Thank you, sir. Steve Quillisi, West Eucalyptus Street. I had a somewhat different request related to this public hearing item. I talked to Rhonda earlier today on the phone, and we jointly discovered that the ordinances are not on the city website. And I think she's going to work toward putting them on. But I would recommend, and I would ask of the council that you direct the staff to make sure that the ordinances are in full text form somewhere available to the public. And second, that when you are proposing text amendments to ordinances, that the text amendment in full text is presented somewhere in the paperwork that comes with the city council agenda so that the citizens can look at the ordinance, look at an amendment, and have full knowledge of what it is you're talking about doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Quillisi. Do I have any more people wanting to speak from the public? No? I closed yeah, I don't have to go. So any more questions from the council?
I don't have any questions. I have a couple of comments. This is really just some cleaning up legislation. And I look at it as though, what would I have voted for at the time we passed the ordinance with regard to projects that were in the pipeline? And I would have said those projects that are in the pipeline should stay in the pipeline. It's just something that was overlooked at the beginning. So it's just for clarification. And I think there would be something abundantly unfair if all of a sudden we said, well, sorry, you were in the pipeline and you'd spent all this architectural time doing your 30-foot high building, but because we have a new ordinance, we're going to tell you got to cut it down to 25. It's just not fair to do it that way. So I just look at it as though if this had been brought to my attention at the time, and Councilwoman Clapp and myself were the ones that really brought the 25-foot ordinance to fruition, and even that being said, if this had come at that time, I would have said anything in the pipeline should not be subject to the new ordinance, so long as it's brought in a timely fashion. And this certainly has. I think we passed the ordinance in May, and here it is October. No kinds of delays at all. I see absolutely nothing wrong with approving this text amendment.
Councilwoman Clapp. Any comments or questions?
Yes. I was going to say yes, and this got passed back and forth between commission and us, and back and forth and back and forth, and it took a long time to draft this. And it's absolutely correct. It got overlooked, and that's what amendments are for, and that's why this is being brought before us. And like you say, it's for cleanup. And I think as a body, that's what we are doing, and I think that that's what we're doing. So I would like to make a motion.
And before you make that motion, I do want to comment on this, and I do understand. I do also believe.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
I need to ask you to close the public hearing.
Oh, so I'm going to close the public hearing then. I do also want to just echo what my fellow council member said about overlooking a provision, but it is important, I think, for us to start moving on and developing some standards. I think I see no issue with that and being more consistent, I guess, as myself as a policy, somebody that is expected to make good policy. I would like to pretty much implement, ask staff to take note of this so that next time it comes up, we don't make the same mistake and we could avoid using some more staff time to something else that could be more productive. So, and with that said, I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to introduce an ordinance which approves text amendment TA 14-03, which amends Section 9 of Ordinance 840, and ask the city clerk to read the title of the ordinance.
Second.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Ojai, California, amending ordinance number 840 related to the effective dates of the new residential building heights. Latz?
Yes.
Clapp?
Yes.
Laura?
Yes. Moving on, our next item was tabled to come up next meeting, but I do have some speaker card, and I do want to give the public the opportunity to give their questions, issues, concerns, whatever it is, regarding this item. So the item is to adopt a resolution setting fees for services for fiscal year 2014 to 2015. And our first speaker card is Steve Quillisi.
Thank you, sir. Steve Quillisi, West Eucalyptus Street. Since this is being continued, I don't want to go into a litany of questions that I have about the fee schedule, but I would like to know with whom I can communicate on city staff to most effectively represent my concerns about a number of items that are in the fee schedule now. Who is that?
And I would defer to.
Why don't you send those concerns to me, Mr. Quillisi, and I'd be happy to work with you and work with the appropriate staff to get you the most complete answers we can.
Thank you, Mr. Quillisi. Anybody else from the public wanting to comment? No? Well, this item will be tabled. Or any council members?
No, I just, do you need a motion? I will move that this matter be continued. Do we have a date certain that you want it to come back?
I think we can bring it back on the, well, no, I think we'll need to hold this back until the November 11th meeting.
Okay, then I'll make the motion that this matter be continued until November the 11th, 2014.
Second.
Roll call.
Latz?
Yes.
Clapp?
Yes.
Laura?
Yes.
Thank you.
Now, item number 4, services agreements with Ojai Unified School Districts related to Channel 10 programming and PEG, public education and government fees. And I'll turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Councilmember Lara. This is my item. We actually had this on the agenda a couple weeks ago, and we had to continue it because of the lateness of the hour. This matter is back before you. Last time that you took a look at this was in March, and at that time the City Council had given direction to staff to negotiate a new agreement with Ojai Unified School District regarding the sharing of the PEG funds, which go to support the operations of Channel 10, which is how we put these City Council and Commission meetings out over the air to folks. And then on the school district side, they use those funds to support the development of programming through their students. So one of the things that was talked about back in the spring was a desire to come up with an agreement where there was actually some cost sharing of the funds. As you would recall in the past, The city council had decided that we were going to give all the PEG funding to the school district to give them a chance to get their program started and going and where they needed to be in terms of their student support. And since that time, there have been changing needs, and the city has had a great need to additionally purchase equipment for the PEG and for Channel 10. So what we have developed in conjunction with negotiation with the district superintendent is a revised agreement for the sharing of the PEG funds. And the PEG funds, I should state, come from the franchise fees that are collected from the customers that are customers of Time Warner. And so a portion of that comes back to the city, and it can only be used to support the operations of Channel 10. So in the past, as I stated, we were giving 100% of those funds to the school district. And what we are suggesting in the agreement is that each year the district superintendent and the city manager or their designee would sit down and discuss the needs of the district and the city and then come up with a cost-sharing agreement. And in no case would either body get less than 25% of the annual funds. So that is what we have negotiated, and that's what we have prepared for the council's consideration tonight. We've also included in there a bit of a sneak preview on some of the things that the school district is working on in terms of additional program enhancement for Channel 10. One of the things that I should note is that there is a provision in this agreement whereby once the district superintendent and city manager have reached a recommendation, that will be then given to each one of the respective governing boards so that they have an opportunity to challenge that agreement, and then they can agendize that and bring that forward. So if either side, either the school board or the city council, does not like what the district superintendent and city manager have negotiated, they can pull that and then bring it forward for discussion. And then there's a provision here to resolve that. Be happy to answer any questions.
Anybody have any questions? Council member, anybody from the public have any questions? Mr. Wywick?
Filled out a card.
Oh yeah. There we go. Maybe I should, yes, Mr. William Wywick.
William Warwick, 607 North Blanche. I would like to comment because, obviously some of us have been on the campaign trail for a while here. And something that keeps coming up at both school board forums and city council forums has been the issue of the largest employing agency with public money in this valley, the Ojai Unified School District, does not televise its meetings. For that matter, I just went to another school board meeting tonight, and you can barely hear what they say. They don't even have microphones. In this respect, the city is really a great example of how it should be done. And I guess I'm asking, referencing the proposal, I think it's quite notable that in terms of the potential programming the district is considering for Channel 10 in this agreement, it doesn't mention its own meetings. Isn't it more important for the school board meetings to be on Channel 10 than compilations of student work, present and past? I mean, it's all important, but this is a large agency in this valley. These are the city's money. It may not be considered appropriate for the city to use the leverage it has in terms of, this is the city's money, in terms of negotiating an agreement with the school board. Maybe it's not considered appropriate to say, let's include that you televise your meetings on Channel 10, but on the other hand, I'm going to step back and say, I think there's a high expectation among the citizens of Ojai, a great interest in this, a great desire for this, and I think as terms of looking at serving the citizens of this city, we perhaps ought to look at trying to include that in the negotiations for sharing these funds, since it is city funds. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wanting to speak on this matter? No, then I'm going to turn it back to council. Any further questions from council?
No, Madam Mayor, I'll make a recommendation or make a motion to adopt the agreement with the Ojai Unified School District related to providing educational television programming services, sharing PEG monies for capital improvements related to Channel 10.
I'll second that motion.
Discussion, please?
Yes. Councilwoman Clapp.
It's interesting because this When this first came before council, I voted no against it for that very reason that Mr. Wyrick brought forward, was that there was no provision for the televising of the school board meetings in the agreement, which I felt was pretty inappropriate. I think it's really important because it is a very important body in this community that their meetings be televised. I would really like to have that be part of the discussion with this agreement. And also, on page 4-3 at the bottom, it says, once an agreement is reached, they shall report the proposed agreement to the members of the respective governing bodies. Members of the city council or school board may choose to agendize consideration of the proposed agreement. I would rather that it did come before city council rather than that we could potentially choose to agendize it. I think that it is enough money that we're dealing with that it actually is beyond the city manager's budget, I believe, to disperse that much money without approval from city council, if I'm not mistaken. Isn't that correct? There's a threshold of $10,000 or so.
That's as independent authority. This would be a specific delegation. So by this contractor, it would be delegating that
Okay,
decision.
well, regardless, I think that it really does need to come before city council, and I would like to have the televising of the school board meetings included in the agreement.
I had a question for staff regarding having the school board televise their meetings. Do they have the equipment, or would we have to provide the equipment for them?
I don't believe they have the equipment. I
But
mean, they have the equipment that they have on site to support their Channel 10, so I'm not sure if they have sufficient equipment or not to be able to do that.
And did that, in the negotiations, did that ever come up about televising their own school board?
They did not bring it up, and it was not something that we were requested to bring up for the negotiation, so no, it did not come up.
I mean, I see the value also in televising the school board. I think it is a big body. I mean, it'd be nice for the valley to be included in what items are being discussed, because it does affect, I think, a bigger population. I don't have any reservation in asking them. I would highly encourage it. I don't know if I'd go to the extent of mandating that item, but I think that it is important. I do see Mr. Wyrick's and Councilwoman Scott's point of view that I would definitely be in favor of supporting that. And I don't know if
if I can make a comment, you know, the school board's an independent body. If they want to televise their meetings, they're welcome to. I don't think we should stand in the middle of it. We got $18,000 to $20,000 annually. If we now want the school board to broadcast, and I think it's a great idea if they do, but it's up to them whether they do or not. Let the public go there and complain about them not broadcasting their meetings. But I don't want to have anything impact the commissions and the meetings that we televise, because quite frankly, our responsibility with this money is to the citizens of our city. And I truly believe that if we start monkeying around and they don't have the equipment, then if we have this contract, which somehow requires that they also broadcast and they don't, well, then they're not going to broadcast us either. And I just think it's presumptuous on our part to force another governmental agency to do something, even though we may agree with it, when it's up to them to do it. And let there be a public outcry with them and talk to the people that are on the board and get it televised. But I don't want anything to happen with the funds that we have earmarked for the PEG to televise our particular commissions and council.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Councilwoman Clark.
There's another consideration. The meetings are also on the same night as city council meetings, so it makes it even more important that these meetings get televised. And it is the money that has been given to the city to be distributed or used in the manner which is most beneficial to the community. And when the original discussion came up for this agreement, I went directly to OUSD and I asked if they would be willing to televise the meetings if we entered this agreement. And I was told absolutely not. They refused to televise their meetings. I am not willing from this body to designate monies that are for public education and government televising to an entity which is a public agency refusing to use that component in their programming or with their portion of their money. And as far as not having the equipment to televise, if they get 25% of the $20,000 right there is what, $5, $10, $15, $25,000, that's a good start to get the equipment that they would need to televise. And the other question I have is, we had the woman, I've forgotten her name, I'm so embarrassed, who used to volunteer to televise our meetings. And she has retired, so now we have someone else doing the camera work tonight. Is that person paid at this point? Carol. Right,
That previous employee was paid, and this current employee is paid.
And this current employee is
That's
paid.
correct.
I thought she volunteered. Okay. No. Okay, I just wondered about that. So I'm just not comfortable with without having that part of the agreement.
I mean, I'm torn in two. I have two students in the elementary school, and I think that it is really important as a parent to be able to view their meetings. But I do agree that I feel like they're on a public government agency, and they should really make their own decisions. This agreement doesn't preclude them to not televise their meetings. They could always have the option to do so. I think that we could make it through their staff presentation that we would also include them televising their meetings, but I wouldn't force it on them. But I just don't think that it's just for that reason to not enter a contract with the school district, which would have some other positive outcomes like televising some of their education, some of their awards night, senior video, all that would be, I think that to me, there's still some positive outcome with this agreement. That's why I could go, I don't think that we should force him and put it into the contract. I think we should give him always that option to do so. Any more comments or questions? We do have a motion on the table. No. In a second. Roll call.
Blatz?
Yes.
Clapp?
No.
Lahr?
Yes.
Passes.
Our next item on the agenda is the 4th of July parade chair placement, and I'll turn it back to staff for the report.
Thank you. Our Public Works Director, Greg Grant, will be making the report.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. This was brought up after the 4th of July parade was held this past year. The council brought up the concern with chairs being on the side of the road. I think most people recognize this has been going on for, as far as I've heard, the hearsay is over 40 years here in Ojai. That I think in my short history here over 3 years, I've seen it about 10 days before the 4th of July parade. A few chairs go out, and pretty quickly the word is out that better move on the chairs or you're going to miss the good shady spots along the side of the road. And I think a lot of people think it's quaint and it's interesting. We do get a few complaints that it's difficult to get out of the car, especially down along the arcade. It can block the gaps between the columns and so on. All the popular shady areas can get packed up quickly. So I think the council was hoping to bring it back and have it discussed whether we could set a boundary on that if we collect chairs. I know in the past we've had some complaints, for instance, not very often, but a few times we've seen couches out there and some large chairs. And we picked those up and put those in the Public Works yard. And that's not that common. I think there was even some huge oversized chairs, kind of like Gilda Radner, laughing type era. And so I thought It's really up, I think, in the agenda, in the discussion administrative report, we threw out 3 days, but it's wide open between 3 days to, I would say, approximately 10 days is the earlier period we see them. I should mention that we discussed this with Caltrans, with the local people. They have some concern that if we condone it, that there might be an issue there, that if we say it 3 days or 5 days, whatever, that if we make that point a cutoff, that we're condoning it in some ways, and they might have some concerns. We talked it over with the city attorney, and he didn't necessarily agree with that consideration, and we were bringing up the point that down in the Rose Parade, I guess, has a 24-hour cutoff. So you're allowed to put up chairs 24 hours, and I think they go up pretty solid at 24 hours a day beforehand. The streets are packed down there. So there's a couple options, and it did seem like in general, my observations out there is that the chairs generally can be pushed apart, but occasionally there's somebody ties in a rope and they want to tie their chairs together, and that probably is a safety consideration. I know we've cut quite a few of those. We take a knife out and go ahead and cut the rope to make sure people aren't getting caught up in the chairs when they think they can push through them. And so I think I just want to caution that any decisions we make here, the ultimate decision is determined by Caltrans. They could always step in. It is the right-of-way, and they have some control over that. Even though we do share right-of-way, for instance, the arcade, once you get behind the column, that is the city's right-of-way. So at that point, open up to any questions.
Does council have any questions? Greg?
What is Caltrans' position on it?
They're saying that that they've seen it going on. Really, I'm talking from the local maintenance supervisor who's responsible for maintaining the right-of-way, that it's technically a violation, but they think it has been done for so long historically that they don't consider it as an issue, and they basically look the other way.
Now, if the chairs were in Caltrans right-of-way, does Caltrans have to enforce it, or do we enforce it?
And I'd say the majority of these chairs are all in Caltrans right-of-way.
Okay, but I mean, do they enforce that, or can we enforce it?
It's shared. We have a contract with Caltrans to maintain a good part of the public right-of-way, so it's shared in that area.
All right. Mm-hmm. I think 3 days is pretty reasonable. It's when it's 2 weeks that I think it gets a little crazy.
Yeah, it does. But I'm going to open it up to the public. I do have a speaker card. Mr. Quillisi?
Thank you, Acting Mayor and council members. The existence of plastic and canvas chairs up and down Ojai Avenue is something that my family members have commented on for at least the past 10 or 11 years. It's one of those quaint things about Ojai that makes it the lovable place that it is. If we have a question of public safety and you wanted to say, okay, you can put chairs down, but keep them 2 feet back from the curb or something like that so that people can open their car doors, I wouldn't have any problem with that kind of a provision. But beyond that, I would urge you not to put too many restrictions on what is a quintessential small town kind of action by all of the people that live here or some that just want to live here. Thank you.
Anybody else from the public like to speak on this item? Mr. Haney?
Randy Haney from 513 Pleasant Avenue. You know, I moved here 21 years ago, and the first parade I came to, we were interacting with all of the parade participants with water guns. And I missed that. In fact, I kind of stopped going to the parades because we took away that interactiveness between participants in it and participants watching it. So I'd like to keep it to 3 days, but allow squirt guns back into the contest.
Anybody else from the public that like to speak on this item? No, I'll close the public hearing and turn it back to council. Does anybody have further
Mr.
comment?
Mayor, I don't care. There's so many more important things than how many days the chairs are out on the street. I just can't go there. I don't care.
Yeah,
I think we should just leave it the way it is and get over it and just I think it's funny. You see a couch out there, or like a lazy boy with, an American flag on it. It's just like quirky and crazy, and it's only for a few days or 7 days, and just to me, it just doesn't matter. There's more important things going on, like Ebola. I'm going to worry about a few chairs.
I just want to comment. I just remember this being, I grew up here in Ojai, and it's always been the norm for people to go and put out chairs out on this before the 4th of July. I really, to me, I didn't choose it to be on the agenda because I didn't think it was an important issue. I think when it comes to safety, I think our staff do a good job, and I would assume that our chief and our police officers really address any type of safety concern there is with chairs. If there's couches, remove them. I think I agree with Mr. Quillisi on adding a lot of provisions to this. I just don't see the point. It's taking more staff time with this item. But I don't know if anybody wants to make a motion or leave it as it is.
Well, I'll just have one comment. I think that the chairs are part of the quirkiness of the 4th of July, but I do believe when they're up 3 weeks before the parade that's kind of ridiculous. And I don't find that being particularly quirky. I find it rather annoying. So I would say a week at the most. 3 days, maybe that's, whatever. I could go along with 3 days or maybe a week, but anything beyond that. I mean, it does really look kind of tacky before then. That's my opinion.
Would anybody like to make a motion or establish a policy regarding the chair place on Ojai Avenue prior to 4th of July parade?
I'll make a motion. I'll say establish a policy regarding chairs placed on Ojai Avenue prior to the 4th of July parade, that no chairs can be placed on the sidewalk more than 7 days beforehand.
Did I hear a second? Dies for a lack of second. So I guess anybody else motion or just go to stays the same? So stays the same. All right, moving on. We addressed item number 6. We're going to adjourn as a city council agency or city council and reconvene with Ohio Redevelopment Successor Agency. And do I hear a motion for the consent calendar or the warrants? Yeah, the consent calendar.
Move to approve.
Second. Clap.
Yes.
Clap. Yes. Laura.
Yes. And I'm going to adjourn as Ohio Redevelopment Successor Agency and return to as Ohio City Council. And I like to ask if there's any report from the city council members.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I don't have a report, but I do have a comment. I ride on the Ojai Valley Trail, the bike trail, a lot. And I just rode again last week. I rode my bike to Ventura. And I got to say that the condition of that trail is getting so dangerous that it's not funny. There's tree limbs that some are painted white, some aren't. You go through areas where there's dappled light, so you have sunlight coming through trees, and you can't see the tree limb, the roots that have pushed up the asphalt, so it's really bumpy. It's just getting really dangerous, and I think that it really needs to be something that gets addressed. I wouldn't know how to do it, but I really think that it's the trail within the city limits, and it's also the trail between the county and the city of Ventura as well. So I would like to see somehow or other we address the issue, because it is a liability and it's dangerous.
We can contact Supervisor Bennett's office and see what assistance they can provide.
That'd be great, thanks. Aside from that,
Anything
nothing.
else?
Nope,
Anything?
nope, that's it.
I don't have anything else to report either. And from our interim or our acting city manager?
I do have a couple announcements, and thank you. I am sitting in tonight for our city manager, Robert Clark, and he will be, he's on vacation, and he will be back for the October 28th meeting, so a pleasure to be here tonight. Just a few announcements that I wanted to pass along to the council and the public. There will be a dedication this coming Tuesday, October 21st at 10:30 a.m. for the new peace pole at City Hall. It is literally right out the door here at the entry to the Ojai Community Garden. The pole is in the ground and it has been completed. It was designed and installed by local artist Richard Franklin. So again, that dedication will be this coming Tuesday at 10:30 a.m. right out here behind City Hall. And everybody from the public is welcome and encouraged to attend. As it had been mentioned a few times, but I'll mention it again, Ojai Day is this Saturday, so please come out and support this festival. We've got Amber's done a fantastic job again. We're sold out, and everything's looking good. And in fact, the weather is looking good for Saturday too. It's supposed to be in the mid-70s, so let's hope that continues. And also wanted to mention that I attended my first meeting as a city representative of the Ojai Flow Group, so I was happy to be welcomed into that group. We've worked out, I believe, the last details on the agreement. We had a little back and forth with that, and I just got the last recommended changes from Flow this morning, and City Attorney and I have taken a look at those, and we're okay with those changes, and we've sent that back to Flow for their approval. So hopefully we'll be able to get that signed here in the next couple of days. That's all I have.
No, Joe? Chief Kenny?
I'd just like to remind the public once again to lock their cars. We're still experiencing thefts from vehicles. We had 5 in the month of September, and all 5 were from unlocked vehicles. So if they could lock their vehicles, that would be beneficial. I can also say that the traffic collisions, though, they're down 29% for the year, which is a good thing. And city arrests are up 43%. So the deputies are out there, they're making arrests, but we're still getting these thefts. So if the public can assist us by locking their vehicles, we'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Chief. Any department heads? Greg? Anyone else out there? No? Rhonda?
I would just like to announce that last day to register to vote is October 20th. I have forms at City Hall, and I also have a blue ballot box. It's well marked in the lobby for people to bring in their absentee ballots.
Well, thank you. That will adjourn our meeting. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I just want to say it's nice to have David Mason sitting in on our meeting. It's always a pleasure to have the local historian. So thank you for being here.
Mr. Ojai. Yes. Thank you. And thank you to all. Meeting adjourned.
Oh.